They called her weak, fragile, useless. For 16 years, Lyra Vance believed them, until the day her stepmother dragged her before the Alpha King's decree, and she realized the truth. She wasn't dying. She was being killed. The kingdom of Arkenfall feared their crippled king. Noble families trembled at his demand for a bride. But when Lyra's own blood chose to sacrifice her to save themselves, something inside her shattered and then ignited. This is the story of a girl who was poison-fed into silence, and the king who gave her a reason to roar. Stay until the end to see her rise. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see where this story travels. And if you're ready for a 2-hour journey through betrayal, power, and redemption, let's begin. The morning Lyra Vance turned 18, she woke to the smell of dying roses and the distant clang of steel on steel from the training yards below. She lay still in her bed, counting the cracks in the ceiling, 37 now, 3 more than last month, and tried to remember what it felt like to run, to swing a practice sword, to climb the old oak tree behind the stables where she and her sister Clara used to hide from tutors and steal honey cakes from the kitchen. That girl was gone now, had been for years. Lyra pushed herself upright slowly, carefully, as though her bones were made of glass. The dizziness came immediately, a wave of nausea that made the room tilt and blur. She gripped the bedpost and waited for it to pass, breathing through her nose the way the physicians had taught her. In, out, in, out. The sickness had started when she was 12. One day she'd been racing Clara through the corridors, laughing so hard her sides ached. The next, she could barely climb the stairs without her legs trembling. Her father, when he'd still been alive, had brought in every healer, every physician, every wise woman from 3 kingdoms over. None of them could name it. None of them could cure it. A mysterious ailment, they'd whispered, a weak constitution, bad blood, perhaps. And so Lyra had learned to live small, to move carefully, to watch life happen beyond her window while she faded like morning mist. Through the glass now she could see the manor grounds spread below, the cobblestone courtyard where guards drilled in formation, the merchants' carts rumbling toward the market square, the wild frontier land of Arkenfall stretching gray and green toward distant mountains. Spring was fighting winter for control of the kingdom, and from her 3rd-floor prison, Lyra could see the battle playing out in patches of snow and brave wildflowers. She pressed her palm against the cold window and closed her eyes. Just once more, she thought. Just one more escape. The door to her chambers opened without a knock. It never did anymore. Servants didn't bother with courtesy for the forgotten daughter. "You're awake." Her stepmother, Lady Margaret Vance, swept into the room like a cold wind, all sharp angles and sharper eyes. She'd married Lyra's father 5 years ago, a widow with her own daughter to provide for. When he died 2 years later, thrown from a horse during a hunt, Margaret had assumed control of the household with ruthless efficiency. "I am," Lyra said quietly, turning from the window. "Good. You have visitors today. The physician will examine you this afternoon, and Clara wants to see you before the evening meal." Margaret's gaze swept over Lyra with clinical detachment, noting the pallor of her skin, the tremor in her hands. "Try to look presentable, at least. We still have standards in this house." For everyone but me, Lyra thought, but she only nodded. "Yes, stepmother." Margaret paused at the door, her expression unreadable. For a moment, just a flicker, something that might have been guilt crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the usual cold efficiency. "Your tea is on the table. Drink all of it. The physician insists it's crucial to your treatment." When the door closed, Lyra's eyes went to the small silver tray on her bedside table. The porcelain cup sat there, delicate and innocent, filled with pale amber liquid that smelled of chamomile and something else, something bitter beneath the sweetness. She'd been drinking this tea every morning and evening for 6 years. "Crucial to your treatment." Lyra lifted the cup with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The first sip was familiar, floral, warm, with that strange metallic aftertaste she'd learned to ignore. She drank it mechanically, the way she'd done 1,000 times before, and set the empty cup back on its saucer. Within minutes, the familiar heaviness began to settle into her limbs. The world grew soft at the edges. She climbed back into bed and let the drowsiness take her, drifting into the gray space between waking and sleeping where she spent most of her days. Hours later, she couldn't say how many, a knock woke her. This one was gentle, accompanied by a familiar voice. Lyra, it's me. Can I come in? Clara. Lyra pushed herself upright again, smoothing her nightgown. Yes, of course. Her stepsister entered like a ray of sunlight, all golden hair and rosy cheeks and vibrant health. Clara was everything Lyra wasn't, strong, beautiful, beloved. But she was also kind, or had been once, before the distance between them had grown too wide to cross. Happy birthday, Clara said softly, settling into the chair beside Lyra's bed. She held a small wrapped package. I brought you something. You remembered. Of course I remembered. Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked tired, Lyra noticed. There were shadows beneath those bright eyes, a tightness around her mouth. Open it. Inside the wrapping was a book, a collection of frontier tales, adventures of brave warriors and cunning merchants who carved kingdoms from wilderness. The kind of stories Lyra had devoured as a child, before reading made her dizzy, before the world beyond her window had become an impossible dream. Thank you, Lyra whispered, running her fingers over the leather binding. It's perfect. I thought... Clara hesitated. I thought maybe you could still travel, even if it's only in stories. Something in her voice made Lyra look up sharply. Clara was staring at her hands, twisting the rings on her fingers, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. What's wrong? Lyra asked. Nothing, I worry about you, that's all. Clara stood abruptly, moving to the window. Do you ever think about leaving, going somewhere else? Where would I go? Lyra tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. I can barely make it down the stairs without collapsing. Right, of course. Clara's reflection in the glass looked strangely haunted. Forget I said anything. I should let you rest. She was gone before Lyra could respond, leaving only the scent of rosewater and the lingering sense that her sister had wanted to say something else entirely. Night fell over Arkenfall like a heavy cloak, and with it came Lyra's secret rebellion. She waited until the manor grew quiet, until the servants retired to their quarters and Margaret's lamplight went dark. Then she rose from her bed and did something the household believed impossible. She got dressed. The act itself took nearly half an hour. Her fingers fumbled with buttons and laces. Her arms trembled with the weight of the simple wool dress. But when she finally stood before her mirror, fully clothed for the first time in weeks, something fierce sparked in her chest. I'm still here, she thought, still alive. The escape route was one she'd discovered months ago, during a particularly lucid afternoon. A servant's staircase led from the third floor down to the kitchens, and from there, a side door opened onto the alley behind the manor. She'd used it sparingly, afraid that discovery would mean losing even this small freedom. But tonight, her 18th birthday, the day she was supposed to become a woman, she needed to feel the outside world one more time. The streets of Arkenfall's merchant quarter were alive even at this late hour. Taverns spilled warm light and raucous laughter onto cobblestones. Street vendors hawked roasted nuts and sweet pastries. Lyra pulled her hood low and moved through the crowd slowly, savoring every sight, every sound, every smell. Here, no one knew her. No one watched her with pity or disgust. She was just another face in the crowd, another body trying to survive in this harsh frontier kingdom. Careful there, miss. A hand steadied her elbow as she stumbled over a loose cobblestone. The speaker was an old merchant, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. Streets are treacherous after dark. Thank you, Lyra managed, her heart racing from the simple exertion. You look pale, the merchant observed, concerned. Are you well? Should I call for... I'm fine, truly. She pulled away gently, smiled to soften the rejection. Just tired. She moved on before he could question further, ducking into a quieter street where musicians played for coin and lovers stole kisses in doorways. This was what she came for, these glimpses of normalcy, of passion, of life unfolding in all its messy, beautiful complexity. A young couple argued outside a tavern, their voices sharp with the particular venom that only comes from deep love turned sour. A child chased a stray cat through an alley, laughing with pure, unself-conscious joy. An old woman sang a working song while she scrubbed the steps of her shop, her voice cracked but steady. Lyra drank it all in, storing these moments like treasures to examine later in the endless gray hours of her confinement. She was so absorbed in watching the street life that she didn't notice the royal guards until they were almost upon her. "Make way!" one of them shouted. "Make way for the royal decree!" The crowd scattered, pressing against building walls as a mounted contingent rode through. At their head was a herald in the king's crimson and gold, carrying a rolled proclamation bound with the royal seal. Lyra's heart sank. She should leave, get back to the manor before her absence was discovered. But something kept her rooted to the spot as the herald dismounted in the square ahead and began to read in a voice that carried over the murmuring crowd. "By order of His Majesty, Kael Draven, Alpha King of Arkenfall and Protector of the Northern Reaches." A strange hush fell over the gathered people. The king's name alone commanded that. Not respect, Lyra realized, but fear. She'd heard the stories, everyone had. The Alpha King who'd taken the throne 3 years ago after his father's mysterious death. The warrior who'd led Arkenfall's armies to brutal victories against neighboring kingdoms. The crippled, unstable ruler who was slowly losing his grip on sanity and power. "His Majesty decrees that it is time for the throne to secure an heir," the herald continued. "As such, he commands that a suitable bride be chosen from among the noble houses of the realm. Each house of standing shall present their most eligible daughter to the royal court within the fortnight. Those who refuse this honor shall be considered in defiance of the crown." The murmurs became gasps, then frantic whispers. Lyra's stomach turned to ice. A bride. He wants a bride. She knew what this meant. Every noble family in Arkenfall would be thrown into chaos, desperately trying to protect their daughters from this fate. Marriage to the Alpha King was supposed to be an honor, but the rumors about Kael Draven had turned it into a death sentence. "They say he can't walk without assistance," the kitchen servants whispered, "that he has fits of rage and paranoia, that he's executed 3 advisors in as many months for imagined betrayals. They say he's looking for a bride because he needs someone to control, someone weaker than himself, someone he can break. Let it be known," the herald finished, "that this decree is absolute and binding. The king will choose his queen. Long live the king!" "Long live the king!" the crowd echoed half-heartedly, and then the square exploded into nervous chatter as people began to scatter, rushing home to spread the news to every corner of the city. Lyra stood frozen in the chaos, her mind racing. The noble houses would panic. Young women would be hidden away, marriages hastily arranged to make them ineligible. Families would bargain and scheme and sacrifice. The word dropped into her mind like a stone into still water. She thought of her stepmother's calculating eyes, of Clara's strange visit, her haunted expression, her question about leaving, of the way Margaret looked at her, not with hatred, but with the cold assessment one might give a tool, a resource, something to be used. "We still have standards in this house," Margaret had said. Standards, but not for Lyra, never for Lyra. "No," she whispered into the noise of the dispersing crowd. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. But even as she said it, Lyra knew. She knew with the terrible clarity that sometimes comes in moments of crisis. She had to get back to the manor. Now. The return journey was agony. Lyra's borrowed strength, the artificial energy that came from being away from her prison, was fading fast. By the time she reached the alley behind her home, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. She made it through the door, up the servants' stairs, and collapsed against her bedroom door just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. For a long moment, she simply lay there, gasping, her vision swimming with exhaustion and the familiar dizziness. But her mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. "Think," she commanded herself, "think." If Margaret was planning what Lyra suspected, there would be signs, preparations. And there was only one person in this household who might tell her the truth, who might still care enough to warn her. Lyra dragged herself to her bed and rang the bell for her maid. Martha arrived 20 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who'd been tending to Lyra since the sickness began. She'd been her mother's maid before that, one of the few servants who remembered Lyra's real mother, the woman who died bringing her into this world. "My lady, you look dreadful," Martha said, genuine concern in her voice. "Did you sleep at all?" "Martha, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest." Lyra caught the maid's hand, held it tight. Please, what's my stepmother planning? Martha's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you... The king's decree. The demand for a bride. Lyra's voice cracked. I need to know. Am I in danger? For a long moment, Martha was silent. Then she sank down onto the edge of the bed, suddenly looking much older. I've served this house for 30 years, she said quietly. Served your mother before you, watched you grow from a babe, and I've never... She paused, choosing her words. I've never felt more ashamed of my silence than I do right now. Lyra's heart began to pound. Tell me. Lady Margaret has been in conference with the steward since the decree was announced last night. I heard them through the study door. They're planning to offer you to the king. The words hit like a physical blow, even though Lyra had expected them. Clara? She managed. Does she know? Martha's expression answered before her words did. Lady Clara is to be married to Lord Brennan of House Thorne. The arrangements were finalized yesterday. They're saying it's been planned for months, but... She shook her head. The timing is too convenient. Lady Margaret is protecting her own blood. And sacrificing me. I'm so sorry, child. So very sorry. Lyra wanted to scream, to rage, to tear down the walls of this pretty prison. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. How long have they been poisoning me? Martha's face went white. What? The tea, the medicine, the treatment that never works, that only ever makes me weaker. Lyra's voice was steady now, cold with certainty. How long, Martha? The maid's silence was confirmation enough. 6 years, Lyra said softly. Since my father married Margaret, since she needed to make sure I wasn't a threat to Clara's prospects, to their position in society. A sick daughter is sympathetic. A healthy one is competition. I didn't know, Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. I swear to you, my lady, I only thought you were truly ill. I would never have helped them if I'd known. I believe you. And Lyra did. Martha had loved her, cared for her, mourned her lost vitality with genuine grief. But you need to help me now. No more tea. No more medicine. Can you do that? They'll notice. Lady Margaret will let her notice. She's sending me to the king anyway. What worse can she do? Martha wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. What do you need? Time. Just a few days to get my strength back, to think clearly. Can you bring me real food? Water instead of that poisoned tea? Yes. And there's something else you should know. Martha glanced toward the door, lowered her voice. The king. The rumors about him being weak, unstable. There are whispers in the capital that say otherwise. That he's not what he appears. That he's playing some kind of game. What kind of game? I don't know. But my cousin works in the royal household, and she says the king moves through those halls like a wolf among sheep. Says he's no more crippled than you or I, that his weakness is a mask. Martha squeezed Lyra's hand. I don't know if it helps knowing that, but I thought you should hear it before you go. After Martha left, Lyra sat in the growing daylight and tried to process everything. She'd been poisoned, kept weak and docile for 6 years to serve her stepmother's ambitions. Her own sister had known or suspected and said nothing. And now she was being traded like livestock to a king who was either genuinely unstable or playing the most dangerous game imaginable. The rage came slowly at first, a small flame in the pit of her stomach. Then it grew, fed by years of helplessness, by every pitying look and dismissive word, by the theft of her own body's strength. But beneath the rage was something else, something sharp and calculating that felt almost foreign in its clarity. If Margaret wants to sacrifice me, fine. But I won't go as a lamb to slaughter. I'll go as myself, whoever that is when the poison finally leaves my system. And if this king is truly playing a game, then maybe, just maybe, I can play one too. She looked down at her trembling hands and made a decision. For the first time in 6 years, Lyra Vance chose to fight back. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended agony. Lyra stopped drinking the tea, stopped taking the medicine. Martha smuggled in real food, bread and cheese and roasted meat, simple fare that tasted like ambrosia after years of bland invalid's gruel. The withdrawal was brutal. Lyra spent hours shaking with nausea, sweating through her sheets, her body screaming for the poison it had learned to depend on. But beneath the sickness, she could feel something else beginning to emerge, a spark of genuine strength, like embers uncovered beneath ash. Margaret noticed on the second day. She came to Lyra's chambers with the household physician, a thin man with nervous hands who'd been prescribing the treatment since the beginning. "You haven't been taking your medicine," Margaret said flatly, watching as Lyra sat upright in bed without assistance. "No," Lyra agreed. "I haven't." "You'll make yourself worse. Dr. Halloran, explain to her—" "I understand perfectly well, stepmother." Lyra met her eyes without flinching. "You've been poisoning me since you married my father, keeping me weak so I wouldn't interfere with Clara's prospects. And now you're sending me to the king like a broken doll you no longer want." The physician went pale and made a strangled sound. Margaret's expression didn't change except for a slight tightening around her mouth. "You have an active imagination," she said coolly. "The sickness has affected your mind." "Has it? Then explain why I'm getting stronger every day since I stopped taking your medicine. Explain why the withdrawal symptoms match those of nightshade poisoning. Explain." "Enough!" Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. "You will resume your treatment immediately, or I will have you confined to your room until the royal summons comes." "You mean until you hand me over to save yourself and Clara?" For a long moment, they stared at each other across a chasm wider than any illness could create. Then Margaret smiled, and it was the coldest thing Lyra had ever seen. "You think you've discovered some grand conspiracy," she said softly. "But the truth is simpler and far more disappointing. Yes, your treatment was designed to keep you manageable, but not out of malice, child, out of mercy. Mercy. Your father never told you, did he? About your mother's family, about the madness that runs in your blood." Margaret's voice took on an almost gentle quality, which made it somehow more terrible. "She was wild, your mother, beautiful and brilliant and completely unstable. She nearly destroyed your father before her death in childbirth saved him from having to make a more permanent decision." Lyra felt as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask Martha. Ask any of the old servants who remember. Your mother had episodes, fits of rage, periods of mania where she'd disappear for days, return covered in dirt and blood, and utterly mad." Margaret moved closer, her eyes almost sympathetic. "When you started showing signs of the same instability at 12, the wild energy, the reckless behavior, the inability to control yourself, your father begged me to help. The medicine wasn't poison, Lyra. It was a kindness, a way to keep you calm, safe, manageable. I was a child. I was happy. You were becoming your mother, and your father couldn't bear to watch it happen again." Margaret sighed. "So yes, I gave you medicine to quiet the storm in your blood. And yes, I'm offering you to the king because it's the only way to protect Clara from being chosen instead. But I'm also giving you a chance at something your mother never had, a purpose, a place in the world, even if that place is beside a broken king." She left before Lyra could respond, taking the physician with her. Alone, Lyra sat in the wreckage of her understanding and tried to separate truth from manipulation. Was my mother really mad? Or is this just another lie to control me? But even as she questioned it, she remembered fragments. Servants whispering, her father's strange sadness whenever he looked at her, the way people sometimes watched her, as if waiting for something to break. Martha came that evening with food and fresh linens. Her face was drawn, and she wouldn't meet Lyra's eyes. "Is it true?" Lyra asked quietly. "About my mother?" Martha set down the tray with shaking hands. "Your mother was complicated. Brilliant and beautiful, yes, but also prone to dark moods and wild impulses. There were times when she frightened even those who loved her most. Was she mad? I don't know, child. I truly don't. In those days, any woman who didn't conform to expectations could be called mad. Your mother didn't fit in the boxes society built for her. Whether that was illness or simply being born into the wrong world," Martha shook her head. "I can't say. And me? Did I show signs? You were spirited, bold. You climbed trees and spoke your mind and refused to be molded into a perfect lady. Lady Margaret saw that as dangerous. Your father saw it as a threat to your future happiness." Martha finally looked up, her eyes fierce. But I saw it as you being exactly who you were meant to be. That night, Lyra made her decision. If her mother's madness was just another word for refusal to be controlled, then maybe Lyra had inherited something valuable after all. And if she was being sent to a king who might be playing his own game of deception, then perhaps there was an opportunity here, a crack in the prison walls wide enough to slip through. She would go to the capital, she would meet this Alpha King, and she would be exactly who she was meant to be. Not the broken doll Margaret tried to create, not the mad woman they feared she'd become, but something else entirely, something they never saw coming. On the morning of the fourth day, when Margaret came to tell her the royal summons had arrived, Lyra stood to meet her without assistance. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her hands were steady. And for the first time in 6 years, when she looked at her reflection, she recognized the girl staring back. "I'll go," she said simply. "But not because you're forcing me. I'll go because I choose to." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to, I'm in the perfect position." Lyra smiled, and there was something sharp in it, something that made her stepmother take an involuntary step back. "You need me to go. The king demands a bride from this house, and Clara is conveniently unavailable, already betrothed. So you need me to walk into that palace and accept my fate like a good, obedient sacrifice." "What's your point?" "My point is that I could refuse. I could throw a fit, claim illness, make such a scene that the king's guards would report back that House Vance offered damaged goods. That would reflect poorly on you, wouldn't it? On your position in society, your daughter's prospects." Margaret's face had gone very still. "So here's what's going to happen," Lyra continued, feeling power flow through her for the first time in years. "I'm going to go to the capital. I'm going to meet the king. And in exchange, you're going to tell me the truth about my mother. All of it. Every detail you've kept hidden. And if I refuse, then I'll make sure everyone at court knows exactly how House Vance treats its daughters. The poisoning, the betrayal, the calculation." Lyra stepped closer. "I may be weak, stepmother. I may be broken. But I've learned one thing in these years behind glass. I've learned to watch, to listen, to see the cracks in pretty facades. And I've seen enough of yours to bring this whole house down around your ears if I choose to." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then Margaret laughed, sharp and bitter and almost admiring. "Your mother used to make threats like that," she said, "right before the madness took her completely. Then I suppose we'll see if I inherited her courage along with her demons." Lyra held out her hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Margaret looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then she took it, her grip cold and firm. "We have an agreement, though I suspect you'll regret this boldness when you're standing before the Alpha King." "Perhaps," Lyra said, "but at least it will be my choice to make." That afternoon, Clara came to say goodbye. She stood in the doorway, looking pale and miserable, twisting her rings the way she always did when nervous. "I wanted to tell you," she said quietly, "about the betrothal, about what Mother was planning. I wanted to warn you, But you didn't," Lyra finished, "because you were afraid of Margaret, of losing your own future, of having to sacrifice yourself instead of letting me be sacrificed for you." Tears spilled down Clara's perfect face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lyra." "You don't deserve this. You don't deserve any of it." Lyra looked at her stepsister, this girl she'd loved once before the poison and the distance and the betrayal, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the first seed of it. "No," she agreed. "I don't. But here's what I've realized these past few days, Clara. None of us get what we deserve. We only get what we're strong enough to take." "What are you going to do?" Lyra smiled, and there was wildness in it. Her mother's wildness, maybe, or just her own finally set free. "I'm going to meet a king, and then we'll see." The carriage came for her at dawn the next morning. Lyra descended the manor steps in a traveling dress Martha had altered to fit her recovering frame. Her legs shook, but they held. Her vision swam, but it cleared. And when she climbed into the carriage without assistance, she heard the gasps from the gathered servants who'd only ever known her as an invalid. Margaret stood at the door, her expression unreadable. As the driver prepared to depart, she called out, "Your mother's name was Elena. She came from the mountain clans where they worship the old gods and believe in wild magic. They say she could speak to wolves, that she ran with them under the full moon. A pause. They also say the madness was a gift from those gods, a price for power. Was she happy? Lyra asked. Until she loved your father, until she tried to fit into his world instead of demanding he fit into hers. Margaretta's eyes were distant, remembering. That's what broke her in the end. Not madness. Compromise. The carriage lurched forward, carrying Lyra away from the only home she'd ever known. Her prison, her sanctuary, the place that had both destroyed and saved her. As the manor disappeared behind them and the road to the capital stretched ahead, Lyra pressed her hand against the window one last time. But this time, she wasn't looking back. She was looking forward, into a future she would write herself, even if it meant walking straight into the den of a king everyone called broken. Even if it meant risking everything on the thin hope that somewhere in the capital's palace there was a truth worth discovering. Even if it meant becoming exactly what they feared, wild, untamed, impossible to control. Let them call it madness, Lyra thought, as the frontier kingdom rolled past her window. I'll call it freedom. And for the first time in 6 years, she smiled. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and with each mile, Lyra felt herself growing stronger. The poison was leaving her system like winter ice melting under spring sun. Her hands stopped shaking. The constant fog in her mind cleared. And on the second morning, when the carriage stopped at a way station to change horses, she walked the full length of the courtyard without assistance. The driver, an older man named Garrett who'd served House Vance for 20 years, stared at her as if she'd risen from the dead. "My lady, you're walking." "I am." Lyra stretched her arms overhead, reveling in the simple pleasure of movement without pain. Miraculous, isn't it? What proper food and clean water can accomplish. Garrett's weathered face creased with confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like shame. He'd driven her to physician's appointments for years, watched her deteriorate, never questioned the narrative of mysterious illness. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "If I'd suspected—" "You would have done nothing," Lyra interrupted, but her voice was gentle. "Because people like my stepmother don't build their power on grand conspiracies. They build it on the small silences of good people who don't want to believe the worst." She left him standing there and walked into the way station's common room, where other travelers gathered around rough wooden tables. Their conversations died when she entered. A young noblewoman traveling without chaperone or companion was unusual enough to draw attention. "Just passing through," she said to the innkeeper, a broad woman with suspicious eyes. "I need a meal and an hour's rest." "You're the one they're taking to the capital, aren't you?" a man at the corner table called out. He was a merchant by the look of him, well-dressed but travel-worn. "To the Alpha King." The room went silent. "I am," Lyra said evenly. "Poor girl," a woman muttered. "Better you than my daughter, but still, what that man will do to you." "What do you think he'll do?" Lyra asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. The woman blinked. "Why, everyone knows he's unstable, mad with power and pain. They say he killed his own father to take the throne early, that he can't even stand without servants holding him upright, that he rages at shadows and sees traitors in every corner. They say a lot of things." Lyra accepted a bowl of stew from the innkeeper and sat at an empty table. "I wonder how much of it is true." "All of it, from what I hear." The merchant leaned forward, warming to his subject. "My brother works in the capital, serves in the palace guard. He says King Kael is a shadow of what he was before the accident. Whatever happened to him, battle wound, assassination attempt, nobody knows for sure. It broke something inside him, made him paranoid and vicious." "And yet the kingdom hasn't fallen," Lyra observed. "If he's truly that unstable, how has Arkenfall not only survived but expanded its borders in the 3 years since he took the throne?" The merchant frowned. "His advisors, I suppose. The generals who actually run things while he sits on his throne and executes those same advisors for treason?" Lyra took a bite of stew. "Seems like an odd way to let them run the kingdom." "You're defending him." The woman's voice rose. "Child, he's going to make you his bride, his prisoner. You should be terrified, not arguing philosophy." Perhaps I am terrified, Lyra said quietly, but I've spent 6 years being told what I am, what I can do, what I should fear. I'd rather form my own opinions, even if they turn out to be wrong. She finished her meal in silence while the other travelers whispered about her. Let them whisper. She'd had enough of being pitied, enough of being the tragic figure in someone else's story. When they left the way station, Garrett spoke for the first time in hours. You're different, my lady, since we left the manor. I myself, Lyra corrected, for the first time in a very long time. And when we reach the capital? When you meet the king? Lyra watched the landscape roll past, the frontier giving way to more settled lands, villages becoming towns, becoming the outer edges of something larger. Then I suppose we'll both discover who that self really is. They reached the capital on the evening of the third day, just as the sun was setting over the city walls. Arkenfall's heart was a sprawling mass of stone and steel built into the side of a mountain, its palace rising from the peak like a crown of iron and granite. Lyra had seen paintings, read descriptions, but nothing prepared her for the sheer scale of it. The city was a living thing, smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys, the clang of smithies and the shouts of street vendors, the smell of humanity pressed together in all its glory and squalor. The palace is on the high road, Garrett said as they navigated through increasingly crowded streets. We'll be there within the hour. But before they could reach the gates, a contingent of royal guards blocked their path. Halt! The captain, a scarred man with cold eyes, approached the carriage. State your business. I'm Garrett of House Vance, delivering Lady Lyra Vance to the palace in response to His Majesty's decree. The captain's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pity, maybe, or contempt. Out of the carriage. Both of you. Lyra descended carefully, aware that every eye was upon her. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the sight of armed guards and a noble carriage. Is that her? Someone whispered. The latest one? Another sacrifice to the broken king. How many is that now? 4, 5? The captain ignored them, his attention fixed on Lyra. You're to come with us immediately. The king wishes to see all candidates tonight. All? Lyra's stomach tightened. How many are there? That's not your concern. Move. They were separated from Garrett and the carriage, swept into the middle of the guard formation like prisoners being marched to execution. The crowd followed at a distance, their whispers growing louder. She looks half dead already. Poor thing probably won't last a week. Better her than my daughter. Better anyone's daughter than mine. Lyra kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. But inside, her heart was racing. Other candidates, other women being dragged before the king like livestock at market. The palace gates loomed ahead, massive iron things carved with wolves and ravens, the symbols of House Draven. Guards stood at attention as their group passed through, their faces expressionless. Beyond the gates, the palace grounds spread out in a complex of courtyards and buildings, all connected by covered walkways and stone paths. They were led through a side entrance, down corridors that grew progressively more ornate, until finally they emerged into a great hall that took Lyra's breath away. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by columns carved to look like ancient trees. Tapestries depicting battle scenes covered the walls, and at the far end, on a raised dais, sat the Iron Throne of Arkenfall, a massive chair forged from swords and shields taken from defeated enemies over generations of conquest. The throne was empty, but the hall was not. 7 other women stood in a line before the dais, each flanked by guards, each wearing expressions ranging from terror to resignation to carefully masked contempt. They were all young, all noble by their bearing and dress, all clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Get in line, the captain commanded, pushing Lyra toward them. She took her place at the end, next to a girl with auburn hair and freckles who looked about 16. The girl glanced at her with wide, frightened eyes. Is this your first time? She whispered. First time for what? The selection. They've been bringing us in groups all day, 8 at a time. He looks us over like horses at auction, and then... She swallowed hard. Then he dismisses us, sends us back to wait. Nobody knows what he's looking for. How long have you been here? 2 days? Some of the girls have been waiting a week. We're housed in the East Wing, barely allowed to speak to each other, fed like prisoners. The girl's voice dropped even lower. 3 girls tried to run. The guards caught them before they reached the city limits. They were brought back, and we haven't seen them since. Before Lyra could respond, a door opened behind the throne, and the hall fell into absolute silence. A man entered, supported on one side by a servant and leaning heavily on a cane. He moved with visible difficulty, each step seeming to cost him. His face was partially obscured by the fall of dark hair, but what Lyra could see was pale, almost gaunt. "All rise for His Majesty Kael Draven, Alpha King of Arkenfall and Protector of the Northern Reaches," a herald announced unnecessarily. Everyone was already standing. The king made his way to the throne with agonizing slowness. The servant helped him sit, then retreated. For a long moment, Kael simply looked at them, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough, as if speaking itself was painful. "Names." One by one, the women gave their names and houses. Most stammered. Several were crying. The girl next to Lyra, Lady Catherine of House Marsh, had to be prompted 3 times before she could get the words out. When it was Lyra's turn, she met the king's eyes and said clearly, "Lyra Vance of House Vance." Something shifted in his expression, so quick she almost missed it. Interest, maybe. Or recognition. "Vance," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "The weak one. The sick daughter they were hiding away." Heat flooded Lyra's face. Of course he would know. Of course her reputation would have reached the capital before her. "I was ill," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I'm recovering." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. The king's gaze traveled over her, assessing. "You don't look recovered. You look like a strong wind would break you." Several of the other women inhaled sharply at his bluntness. Lyra felt the old shame trying to rise, the instinct to shrink and apologize and make herself smaller. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Looks can be deceiving, Your Majesty. I'm stronger than I appear." The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody spoke to the king like that. Nobody contradicted him, not if they valued their position or their safety. Kael leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, Lyra got a clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25, though pain had aged him. His features were sharp, aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a jaw that spoke of stubborn will. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were storm gray and absolutely alert, burning with an intelligence that seemed at odds with the broken body they inhabited. "Strong," he said softly. "We'll see. Dismissed. All of you. Guards, take them back to their quarters." "Your Majesty," one of the women began, her voice desperate. "I said dismissed." They were herded out like cattle, back through the corridors to the east wing where they'd been housed. The quarters were comfortable enough, individual rooms surrounding a common area, but the doors locked from the outside and guards stood at every exit. A prison with silk curtains. Lyra was shown to a small chamber with a bed, a washstand, and a narrow window that looked out over the city. The guard locked the door behind her without a word. She sank onto the bed and tried to process what had just happened. The king was exactly what the rumors claimed. Weak, unstable, barely able to stand. But those eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had seen through her in seconds. "You look like a strong wind would break you." The words stung because they were true. Despite her recovery, she was still thin, still pale, still bearing the marks of 6 years of poison. But she'd expected pity or disgust, not that cool assessment. A knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. "Lady Vance, may I enter?" The voice was female, cultured. "It's locked from the outside," Lyra called back. "Oh, right. Well, I'm Lady Helena of House Sterling. I'm in the room next to yours. There's a connecting door. The locks don't work on those. May I?" Lyra opened the door between their chambers and found herself face to face with a striking woman of about 25, with black hair and sharp features. "You're the one who talked back to him," Helena said, a smile playing at her lips. "That took either courage or stupidity." "Probably stupidity," Lyra admitted. "Probably. But it was magnificent to watch. Most of us just stand there trembling while he looks us over like we're livestock." Helena moved into Lyra's room and sat on the bed as if they were old friends. "I've been here 5 days, seen 3 rounds of selection. Want to know what I've learned? Please?" He's not actually looking for a bride. Or if he is, He has the strangest criteria I've ever encountered. Beautiful women, ugly women, rich, poor, from powerful houses or minor ones. He dismisses them all with the same disinterest, but every so often, someone catches his attention. Like you did today. What happens to the ones who catch his attention? Helena's expression darkened. I don't know yet. They're separated from the main group, taken somewhere else in the palace. But here's the strange part. When I've asked the guards about them, they claim not to know who I'm talking about, as if those women never existed. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. You think he's killing them? I think he's doing something. What I can't say, but whatever this is, it's not a normal bride selection. It's... She paused, searching for words. It's a test, and we're all taking it whether we want to or not. They talked for another hour, comparing experiences, sharing what little information they'd gathered. Helena was smart and observant, with a sharp wit that reminded Lyra painfully of what she might have become if the poison had never stolen her youth. You should sleep, Helena finally said. Tomorrow they'll bring another group, and we'll all stand in line again while he looks through us. It's exhausting, being reduced to a thing to be examined. After Helena left, Lyra tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to those gray eyes and that rough voice. You look like a strong wind would break you. In the morning, breakfast was brought by silent servants who wouldn't meet her eyes. Lyra ate mechanically, her stomach in knots. Through the window she could see the city waking, merchants opening shops, workers heading to the forges and mills, life continuing as if there weren't 8 terrified women locked in the palace awaiting a mad king's pleasure. The door opened without warning. The same scarred captain from yesterday stood there, his expression grim. Lady Vance, you're to come with me. Where? The king wishes to speak with you, alone. Helena appeared in the connecting doorway, her face pale. That's what happened to the others, she whispered. The ones who disappeared. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stood and smoothed her dress. Then I suppose I'll find out what happened to them. She followed the captain through a different set of corridors, deeper into the palace. These halls were quieter, less ornate, functional rather than decorative. They passed rooms that looked like offices, a library, what might have been a war room with maps spread across a massive table. Finally, they stopped at a heavy wooden door. Inside, the captain said. And Lady Vance? Whatever happens in there, don't scream. It only makes it worse. He left before she could ask what that meant. Lyra took a breath, pushed open the door, and stepped into a king's private study. The room was smaller than she'd expected, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers and maps. A fire burned in the hearth, and standing by the window, without his cane, without any sign of the weakness he'd displayed in the throne room, was Kyle Draven. He turned when she entered, and Lyra's breath caught. The man before her bore little resemblance to the broken king from last night. He stood tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a warrior's build barely concealed by his simple shirt and trousers. His movements were fluid, controlled, powerful. Close the door, he said, and his voice was different too, stronger, clearer, with an edge of command that sent shivers down her spine. Lyra closed the door with shaking hands. You're not crippled. No. Last night you could barely walk. Last night I was performing for an audience. Kyle moved toward her with predatory grace, and Lyra had to resist the urge to back away. The question is, what are you performing? The weak girl recovering from mysterious illness, or something else entirely? I don't understand. Don't you? He circled her slowly, studying her from every angle. House Vance sends their sick daughter to the king, the expendable one, the sacrifice. But when I looked at you last night, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone hiding her true strength, just as I hide mine. Lyra's mind raced. This was a test, clearly, but she didn't know the right answer. Didn't know if there even was a right answer. Why? She asked instead. Why pretend to be weak? Kyle stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Why did you pretend to be weak? I wasn't pretending. I was being poisoned. His expression shifted, surprise, quickly masked. Explain. So she did. The words tumbled out in a rush she couldn't control. The years of illness, the discovery of the poison, Margaret's betrayal, Clara's silence. All of it. She didn't know why she was telling him, this stranger who held absolute power over her life, except that those eyes demanded truth, and she was so tired of lies. When she finished, Kael was quiet for a long moment. Nightshade, he finally said, mixed with something else to mask the taste and prolong the effects. Subtle, cruel, effective. He moved to a cabinet, poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one. You said you stopped taking the poison 4 days ago. How do you feel? Stronger, clearer, but still not... She paused. Not myself. Not yet. It will take weeks for the full effects to fade, maybe months. He sipped his wine, watching her over the rim. Why did you agree to come? Why not refuse? Expose your stepmother. Fight back. What was I fighting back with? No proof. No allies. And even if I'd convinced someone of the truth, what then? I'd still be the damaged daughter of a minor house. Still powerless. Lyra met his eyes. At least here, I have a chance to be something else. And what do you want to be? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Free, Lyra said simply. I want to be free. Kael's laugh was sharp and bitter. Then you've come to the wrong place. There's no freedom in this palace, Lady Vance, only different kinds of cages. Then why am I here? Why this private audience while the other women wait in their locked rooms? Because I need to know if you can be trusted. Trusted with what? Instead of answering, Kael set down his glass and moved to his desk. He pulled out a letter, sealed with the crest of House Sterling, Helena's house. Do you know what this is? Lyra shook her head. It's a letter from Lord Sterling to his daughter Helena, smuggled in 3 days ago by a bribed servant. In it, he gives her very specific instructions on how to poison me once she's made queen, the method, the timing, even which servants to recruit to the cause. His voice was eerily calm. Your new friend is an assassin, Lyra, and she's one of 3 in the current group of candidates. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lyra's feet. Helena is charming and intelligent and here to kill me. Just like half the women paraded through this hall are here to kill me, or spy on me, or manipulate me into alliances that would destroy the kingdom from within. Kael's eyes burned into hers. This bride selection isn't about finding a wife. It's about exposing traitors, and you just walked into the middle of it. Lyra's glass slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor. The others who disappeared, she whispered. The ones Helena mentioned are in the dungeons awaiting trial for treason, along with their families who conspired to use them as weapons against the throne. And me? Lyra forced herself to ask. What am I? Another test? Another potential traitor? That's what I'm trying to determine. Kael moved closer again, his presence overwhelming. House Vance is minor, insignificant, but your stepmother has been making moves lately. Quiet alliances, strategic marriages, building power. His hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. So tell me, Lyra Vance, are you here to kill me? Or are you just the sacrifice they sent to save their own skins? She should be terrified, should be trembling under that iron grip and those merciless eyes, but all she felt was a strange, fierce anger. Neither, she said through her teeth. I'm here because I had nowhere else to go, because my own family poisoned me and traded me like property, because I'm tired of being weak and afraid, and I'd rather face a dangerous king than spend another day in that prison they called home. She wrenched free of his grip, her chest heaving. So if you want to throw me in the dungeons with the others, do it. If you want to send me back to House Vance in disgrace, do that. But don't you dare stand there and act like I'm part of some grand conspiracy when the only thing I'm conspiring to do is survive. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Kael smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him, and it transformed his entire face. There, he said softly. There's the strength I saw last night. He turned away, moving back to the window. You have a choice to make, Lyra. I can send you home tonight, give you a purse of gold, enough to start somewhere new, away from your stepmother and her schemes. You'd be free, truly free. Or you can stay. Help me finish rooting out the traitors in this nest of vipers. Play the role of willing bride while we watch who approaches you, who tries to recruit you, who shows their hand. He glanced back at her. It would be dangerous, potentially deadly, And at the end, even if we succeed, you'd still be trapped in this palace as my queen. A different cage, as I said. Why would you offer me that choice? Lyra demanded. You don't know me. Don't know if I'm telling the truth about any of this. No, Kyle admitted. But I know lies, and I know desperation, and I know the look of someone who's been underestimated their entire life. You're either the best actress I've ever encountered, or you're exactly what you appear to be, a survivor. He extended his hand. So what will it be, Lyra Vance? Freedom and uncertainty? Or danger and purpose? Lyra looked at that outstretched hand, at the man behind it, at the choice that would define everything that came after. She thought of her stepmother's cold calculations, of Clara's guilty silence, of 6 years stolen by poison and lies, of a mother she'd never known who'd been called mad for refusing to be controlled. She thought of freedom, real freedom, bought with gold and solitude, a life lived in the shadows where nobody could hurt her again. And then she thought of the fierce joy that had burned through her when she'd talked back to him in the throne room, when she'd stood her ground just now instead of cowering, when she'd finally stopped being afraid. I'm tired of watching life happen through windows, she realized. Tired of being safe and small. She took his hand. I'll stay, she said, and I'll help you. But not because I want to be queen, and not because I owe you anything. I'll do it because they taught me to be weak, and I'm going to prove them all wrong. Cale's grip tightened, his smile sharpening into something dangerous and pleased. Then welcome to the game, Lyra. Try not to die. The game began that very afternoon. Kyle had one of his trusted servants, a woman named Iris with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, escort Lyra back to the East Wing quarters. But before they left his study, he'd gripped her shoulder and spoken in a voice meant only for her ears. Trust no one. Not Helena, not the other candidates, not even the servants who seem kind. Everyone in this palace has an agenda. The moment you forget that is the moment you become a liability I can't afford. Now walking through the corridors with Iris's silent presence beside her, Lyra felt the weight of that warning settle into her bones. She'd agreed to play a role in Kael's deadly chess game, but she hadn't fully understood what that meant until this moment. She was stepping into a nest of vipers with nothing but her wits and the thin protection of a king who might be using her just as ruthlessly as everyone else. We're here, Iris said, stopping at the door to Lyra's chamber. The woman's expression was unreadable. A word of advice, girl. The king doesn't offer choices like the one he gave you. The fact that he did means he sees something in you worth keeping alive. Don't waste it. Before Lyra could respond, Iris was gone, her footsteps fading down the corridor. The door to Helena's chamber opened immediately. Where were you? Helena's face was pale, her eyes wide with barely controlled fear. The guards took you away hours ago, and nobody would tell us anything. I thought... She stopped, swallowed hard. I thought you were gone like the others. Lyra forced herself to smile, to play the part Cale needed her to play. The king wanted to question me privately, about my family, my illness, whether I was fit to be considered. And? Helena pulled her into her own room and closed the connecting door. What did he say? What's he like when the court isn't watching? This was it, the first test. Helena, charming, intelligent Helena, who'd befriended her so quickly, was an assassin sent by her own father to kill the king. Every word Lyra spoke now would either deepen the trap or expose her as Kael's agent. Lyra chose her words carefully, remembering the broken performance in the throne room versus the dangerous reality in the study. He's exactly what the rumors say. Weak, paranoid, barely able to stand without assistance. He questioned me for 20 minutes before he grew too tired to continue. I don't think he even remembered half of what he asked. It was a risk, playing Kael as genuinely incapacitated. But if Helena believed the king was as broken as everyone claimed, she might grow confident, might make mistakes. Helena's expression shifted, relief mixed with something darker, calculation. Then he's no threat, she said quietly, almost to herself. Threat to what? Nothing. I just meant... Helena shook her head, painted on a smile. I'm glad you're safe, that's all. Come, the others will want to hear that you survived a private audience. The common area was filled with nervous women, all of them watching Lyra with a mixture of envy and fear as she entered. Over the next hour, She recounted a carefully edited version of her meeting with the king, playing up his weakness, his confusion, his inability to hold a coherent conversation for long. She watched their faces as she spoke. Some showed relief. The king's instability meant he might be easily manipulated. Others showed contempt. What kind of ruler couldn't even conduct a simple interview? And a few, like a sharp-faced woman named Lady Morgana of House Blackwood, showed nothing at all. Those were the dangerous ones, Lyra realized, the ones who'd learned to hide their thoughts behind perfect masks. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Lyra heard whispers through the thin walls. Plotting, scheming. Women who'd been thrown together by royal decree were forming alliances, making plans, preparing for whatever came next. She pressed her ear against the wall, connecting her room to Lady Morgana's, and caught fragments of conversation. Father says the king won't last another year. If we can just get close enough. The poison is already in place. We just need... Lyra's blood ran cold. How many of them were assassins? How many were spies? And how was Kael managing to stay alive, surrounded by so much coordinated treachery? Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by dreams of her stepmother's cold smile and Clara's guilty eyes, and a king who wore two faces and trusted no one. The next morning brought a summons. All the candidates were to gather in the great hall for an announcement. They were herded through the corridors by guards who wouldn't meet their eyes, emerging into the massive space where they'd first been presented to Kael. The throne sat empty, but the hall was filled with courtiers, nobles and advisors and military commanders, all watching the candidates with expressions ranging from pity to disdain. Lyra found herself standing between Helena and Lady Catherine, the frightened 16-year-old who'd spoken to her on the first day. Catherine was trembling so badly her teeth chattered. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Why are all these people here?" Before anyone could answer, the herald's voice rang out. "All rise for His Majesty." Kael entered as he had before, slowly, painfully, leaning on his cane and supported by a servant. But this time, Lyra knew the truth, knew that every stumbling step was calculated, every wince of pain a performance designed to make his enemies underestimate him. He made his way to the throne and settled into it with visible difficulty. Then he raised his head and surveyed the assembled crowd. "My lords and ladies," he said in that rough, pained voice that grated like metal on stone, "I have made my decision regarding the selection of a queen." The hall went absolutely silent. Beside Lyra, Helena tensed. "After careful consideration of all the candidates presented, I have determined that a formal selection process would best serve the kingdom. Therefore, the remaining candidates will undergo a series of trials over the next week. These trials will test their suitability to rule beside me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented. Royal marriages were arranged through negotiation, alliance, political calculation, not trials like some kind of competition. "The first trial," Kael continued, "will take place tonight. All candidates will attend a feast in the Great Hall, where they will be expected to navigate court politics, demonstrate their understanding of protocol, and prove they can hold their own among the nobility of Arkenfall." He paused, his gray eyes scanning the line of terrified women. "Those who fail will be sent home immediately. Those who succeed will continue to the next trial. And at the end, one woman will become my queen, not because of her family's power or wealth, but because she has proven herself worthy of the throne." The courtiers erupted into excited chatter. A feast, trials. This was entertainment, a spectacle. The candidates were no longer potential queens. They were players in a game designed for the amusement of the powerful. Lyra felt rage building in her chest. This was what Kael had meant when he said the selection was about exposing traitors. He wasn't just testing the candidates, he was forcing the nobility to reveal their allegiances, to choose sides, to make moves that would expose their true loyalties. And the candidates were bait. "Dismissed," Kael said, waving a weak hand. "Prepare yourselves. The feast begins at sundown." They were marched back to their quarters in chaos. Some women were crying. Others were frantically discussing strategy. Helena grabbed Lyra's arm the moment they were alone. "This is our chance," she hissed. "At a feast, with wine flowing and guards distracted by ceremony, we can what?" Lyra interrupted, her heart pounding. "What exactly are you planning, Helena?" Helena's eyes narrowed. I thought you understood. The king is weak, unstable. He's destroying this kingdom with his paranoia and his purges. Someone needs to stop him before… Before what? Before he roots out all the traitors who've been plotting against the throne? Before he exposes the noble houses who'd rather see Arkenfall fall into civil war than submit to a king they can't control? The words were out before Lyra could stop them. Helena stepped back as if slapped. What did he say to you in that study? Her voice was cold now, dangerous. What did he promise you? Nothing. He promised me nothing. Lyra forced herself to breathe, to think. She'd revealed too much, let her anger override her caution. I just don't think assassination is the answer. If you kill him, what then? The kingdom tears itself apart as every house fights for the throne? Better chaos than tyranny. Is it? Lyra met Helena's eyes. Is it really? Or is that just what your father told you to believe? For a moment she thought Helena might attack her. The other woman's hand moved to her belt, where Lyra now noticed the outline of a small blade hidden beneath the folds of her dress. Then Helena smiled, cold and sharp. You're right, she said. Assassination is too crude, too obvious. There are other ways to remove an unstable king from power. She moved toward the door. Enjoy the feast, Lyra. I suspect it will be quite memorable. When she was gone, Lyra sank onto her bed and tried to stop shaking. She'd just made an enemy of the most dangerous woman in the East Wing. Helena would be watching her now, suspicious of where her loyalties lay. And the worst part was, Lyra wasn't even sure herself. Hours later, servants arrived with gowns for the feast. Lyra's was deep emerald green, simple but elegant, designed to complement her dark hair and pale skin. As the servants helped her dress, she studied her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. 4 days ago, she'd been a ghost in her stepmother's manor. Now she was preparing to attend a royal feast as a candidate for queen, playing both sides of a deadly game she barely understood. You'll do, Iris said from the doorway, startling Lyra. The older woman moved into the room and dismissed the servants with a gesture. The king asked me to give you this. She held out a small vial of clear liquid. What is it? Antidote, for poison. Iris's expression was grim. There will be attempts tonight, on you, on the other candidates, possibly on the king himself. Drink this before the feast. It won't protect you from everything, but it will buy you time if someone slips something into your wine. Lyra took the vial with trembling hands. He thinks they'll try to kill me? He thinks they'll try to kill anyone who appears to be gaining his favor. You survived a private audience. You'll be watched tonight, tested. Show weakness, and they'll dismiss you. Show strength, and they'll try to eliminate you. Iris's eyes softened slightly. The king chose you for this game because he believes you can survive it. Don't prove him wrong. The great hall had been transformed for the feast. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits and cheeses and delicacies from across the kingdom. Candles blazed in massive chandeliers overhead. Musicians played in the gallery, their melodies barely audible over the roar of conversation. The candidates entered in a group, and the hall fell silent as every eye turned to assess them. Lyra felt the weight of those stares like physical things, measuring, judging, calculating her worth. Vultures, Lady Catherine whispered beside her. They're all vultures. The seating had been carefully arranged. Each candidate was placed at a different table, surrounded by nobles who would evaluate and interrogate them throughout the meal. Lyra found herself between Lord Thorne, a massive man with a red face and loud voice, and Lady Ashford, an elegant woman with calculating eyes. So you're the Vance girl, Lord Thorne boomed, filling her wine cup to the brim. Heard you were at death's door for years. Miracle you're even standing, eh? Indeed, my lord, Lyra said carefully, remembering the antidote she'd drunk before entering the hall. Your stepmother is an interesting woman, Lady Ashford observed, her tone carefully neutral. I understand she's made quite a few strategic alliances recently. This was the game, then. Probe for information, assess loyalties, determine which house she truly represented. My stepmother and I are not close, Lyra said, choosing honesty as her weapon. I'm here representing myself, not House Vance. Lord Thorne laughed. Representing yourself? That's rich. Nobody here represents only themselves, girl. We're all puppets of family and duty. Perhaps, but some of us are tired of having our strings pulled. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lyra saw surprise flicker across both nobles' faces. Then Lady Ashford smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her severe features. Well said. Perhaps there's more to you than rumors suggest. The meal progressed in a blur of conversation and careful navigation. Lyra watched the other candidates struggle with their own tables, Lady Catherine stammering through questions about her family's trade routes, Helena charming a group of military commanders with discussion of frontier tactics, Lady Morgana sitting in cold silence that made even hardened warriors uncomfortable. Then, halfway through the third course, someone screamed. The hall erupted into chaos. At the far end of the room, one of the candidates, a girl named Elise from House Raven, was convulsing in her chair, foam specking her lips. Poison! Someone shouted. Guards rushed forward, but it was too late. Elise's body went rigid, then limp. The physician who'd been summoned could only shake his head. She's dead. The words cut through the noise like a blade. Dead. Someone had poisoned a candidate in the middle of a royal feast, under the eyes of guards and nobles and the king himself. Lyra's stomach turned. She'd drunk the antidote, but Elise hadn't. Elise had been a real victim, an innocent girl caught in a game she never understood. Clear the hall! Kael's voice rang out, stronger than Lyra had heard it in public. He was standing now, without his cane, his face pale but his eyes blazing. Guards, seal the doors. No one leaves until we determine who is responsible for this outrage. But in the chaos, someone did leave. Lyra caught a flash of movement from the corner of her eye. Lady Morgana, slipping through a servant's entrance while everyone's attention was on the dead girl. She had seconds to decide. Follow Morgana and potentially expose a conspiracy, or stay and play it safe. Lyra chose to follow. She slipped away from her table while Lord Thorne was shouting for guards, ducking through the same servant's entrance Morgana had used. The corridor beyond was dark and narrow, designed for servants to move through the palace unseen. Ahead, she heard footsteps and low voices. Wasn't supposed to kill her, just make her sick enough to be eliminated. The dosage was wrong. Your contact provided faulty information. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. Two voices, both female. Morgana and someone else. It doesn't matter, the second voice said. One candidate dead sends the message. The king is losing control, can't even protect the women in his own hall. And tonight, during the chaos, we move as planned, the king's chambers while his guards are distracted. Lord Brennan has already arranged the distraction. By morning, Kael Draven will be dead and the throne will be... Lyra's gasp gave her away. Both women spun toward her hiding spot. In the dim light, Lyra recognized the second speaker, Lady Ashford, the elegant woman who'd sat beside her at dinner, who'd smiled at her boldness. Well, Morgana said softly, drawing a blade from her sleeve, it seems we have a witness. Lyra ran. She crashed back through the servants' entrance into the great hall, which was still in chaos. Guards were questioning nobles. The physician was examining Elise's body, and Kael was nowhere to be seen. The king! Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. Where is the king? A guard turned to her, confused. His Majesty retired to his chambers. The excitement was too much for his weakened state. Why? Lyra was already running, shoving past nobles and guards, her skirts hiked up around her knees. She could hear Morgana and Ashford behind her, could hear them shouting for guards to stop her. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because she'd heard the plan. Lord Brennan, Clara's betrothed, was providing a distraction. The chaos in the hall was deliberate, designed to pull guards away from the king's private chambers. And Kael, playing his role of weakness, had walked straight into a trap. She burst through corridor after corridor, following the path Iris had taken that morning. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Ahead, she could see the door to Kael's study standing open. No, she breathed, putting on a final burst of speed. She crashed through the door and froze. Kael was standing in the center of the room, very much not weak, very much not surprised. Around him, bound and on their knees, were 5 men in dark clothing, assassins by the look of their weapons. And standing calmly beside the king, sword drawn and bloody, was Iris. You're late, Kael said, looking at Lyra with one eyebrow raised. I expected you 5 minutes ago. What? Lyra couldn't process what she was seeing. The assassins walked straight into our trap, yes. Kale gestured to the bound men. The feast was bait. The chaos was expected. We've been waiting for Lord Brennan's people to make their move for 3 days now. But Elise was an unfortunate casualty. His expression hardened. One I will ensure is avenged, but her death served a purpose. It forced our enemies to act prematurely, to reveal themselves before they were ready. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. Morgana and Ashford burst through the door, blades drawn, and stopped dead at the scene before them. "Going somewhere, ladies?" Kyle asked pleasantly. Morgana recovered first, her blade rising. "The king can barely stand. One old woman and a half-dead girl won't stop us from—" She lunged. What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds, but would burn itself into Lyra's memory forever. Kale moved like water, like lightning, like nothing Lyra had ever seen. His hand caught Morgana's wrist mid-strike and twisted. The blade clattered to the floor. Before Ashford could react, Iris had her sword at the woman's throat. Kale held Morgana effortlessly, his face inches from hers. "I am not weak," he said softly. "I am not broken, and I am very, very tired of people underestimating me." He released her, and she fell to her knees, cradling her wrist. Guards flooded into the room, surrounding the conspirators. "Take them to the dungeons," Kyle commanded, "along with Lord Brennan and anyone else who was part of this plot. I want a full accounting by morning." As the guards dragged the struggling women away, Kyle turned to Lyra. She was still standing in the doorway, her mind reeling from everything that had just happened. "You followed them," he said, "heard their plan. Came to warn me, even though you could have stayed safe in the chaos." "I thought you were in danger." "And if I had been? If those assassins had overwhelmed me before you arrived, what would you have done? Tried to fight them yourself?" Lyra lifted her chin. "If necessary." Something in Kyle's expression shifted, softened. He crossed to her in 2 long strides and took her face in his hands. "You magnificent, foolish woman," he said. "You could have been killed." "So could you." "I've been nearly killed a dozen times. I'm used to it. But you—" He stopped, as if he'd just realized how close he was standing, how his hands were cradling her face like something precious. He stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "You did well tonight, better than I expected." "Was this all part of your plan? The feast? The trials? Elise's death?" "Not her death. Never that." Pain flickered across his features. "But the rest? Yes. I needed to flush out the conspiracy, needed them to act where I could control the outcome. And I needed someone in the middle of it all who they wouldn't suspect, someone they'd see as too weak to be a threat. Me. You." He moved to pour them both wine, his hand steady. "The broken king and the poisoned girl. We make quite a pair." Lyra accepted the cup, her own hands shaking with delayed shock. "What happens now?" "Now the real work begins. We've cut off one head of the Hydra, but there are more. Brennan was working with someone higher up, someone with real power. We need to find them before they strike again." "And the trials? The selection?" Kale's smile was sharp and cold. "Will continue exactly as announced, because whoever is behind this conspiracy thinks they've lost one attempt, but they still have candidates in play, still have eyes and ears in the palace. And as long as they think the king is weak and distracted by his bride search, they'll keep making mistakes." He moved closer again, his eyes intense. "But I need to know, Lyra, after tonight, after seeing what this really is, are you still willing to play your part? To be bait in a trap that could close on you at any moment?" Lyra thought of Elise's dead eyes, of Helena's calculating smile, of 6 years spent powerless while others decided her fate. She thought of the king who'd offered her freedom and the choice she'd made instead. "I'm still willing," she said, "but not as bait. As your partner in this. You want someone they won't suspect? Fine. But that means you trust me with the whole truth, all of it. No more secrets." Kale studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Agreed. Though you may regret that demand when you learn how deep this conspiracy goes." He extended his hand, not as king to subject, but as equal to equal. "Partners, then, in this game where the stakes are the kingdom itself." Lyra took his hand, felt the calluses of a warrior, the strength of a leader who'd been hiding both behind a mask of weakness. "Partners," she agreed. The door burst open and Iris rushed in, her expression grim. "Your Majesty, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where half the candidates just disappeared from the East Wing, including Lady Helena of House Sterling." Kyle's face went deadly calm. "When?" "During the chaos after the poisoning. The guards were focused on securing the hall. By the time they checked the quarters, 8 women were gone." 8. Kyle's hand tightened on his sword. "They took the other conspirators with them, which means they're regrouping," Lyra finished, "planning something bigger. Or running back to whoever sent them with news that their plot failed." Kyle was already moving toward the door. "We need to catch them before they reach the city walls. Iris, mobilize the guard. I want every gate sealed and—" The explosion cut him off. The entire palace shook. Glass shattered. From somewhere far below, screams rose into the night. Kyle and Iris exchanged a look of pure horror. "The arsenal," Iris whispered. They ran. Through corridors now filling with smoke, past panicking servants and confused guards, down staircases toward the lower levels where the palace kept its weapons and gunpowder stores. The arsenal was in ruins. Flames consumed what had once been a fortified chamber, spreading rapidly to the surrounding rooms. Guards were trying to contain the blaze, while others evacuated nearby sections of the palace. "How many inside, T.It's?" Kyle demanded of the captain on scene. "At least a dozen guards, Majesty, plus whoever set the charges." The captain's face was black with soot. "We can't get close enough to—" "There are still people in there," Lyra said, pointing. Through the smoke and flames, she could see movement, someone trapped, trying to reach the door. "The fire's too hot," Iris said. "We'll lose anyone who tries to go in." Kale was already removing his jacket, already moving toward the flames. "Your Majesty, you can't—" "I'm not losing more people tonight." He plunged into the inferno. Lyra didn't think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed a discarded cloak, soaked it in a water barrel, and followed. The heat was unbelievable. Smoke choked her lungs. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, couldn't hear anything over the roar of flames and the crack of burning timber. "Kyle," she shouted, "where are you?" A hand grabbed her arm, pulled her forward. Through the smoke, she could make out Kyle's form. He had a guard slung over his shoulder, unconscious, but breathing. "This way," he gasped. "There's a storage room, 3 more trapped." The ceiling groaned above them. "It's coming down!" someone screamed. Kale shoved the unconscious guard into Lyra's arms. "Get out! Now!" "Not without you!" "I said get out!" But Lyra had already seen what he'd seen. The 3 guards in the storage room, trapped behind a wall of flame. If they left now, those men would burn alive. She made a choice. Dropping the wet cloak over the flames, she created a narrow path. "Go! Move!" The guard stumbled through, coughing and bleeding. Kyle grabbed the last one just as the ceiling gave way with a sound like the world ending. They ran. Timber crashed behind them. Flames licked at their heels. Lyra's lungs burned and her vision swam, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because Kyle's hand was locked around hers, and they were running together through hell itself. They burst out of the arsenal into the corridor beyond, just as the entire structure collapsed inward. Lyra fell to her knees, gasping, her dress singed and smoking. Beside her, Kyle did the same, his face black with soot, his eyes streaming. But they were alive. And the guards they'd pulled from the flames were alive. "You idiots," Iris said, appearing above them with water and blankets. But her voice was choked with emotion. "You magnificent, suicidal idiots." The palace physician examined them both, declared them miraculously unharmed except for smoke inhalation and minor burns, and ordered them to rest. Neither of them rested. They stood in Kyle's study as reports came in. The explosion had been deliberate, set with military precision to cause maximum damage. 8 guards dead, a dozen injured, and in the chaos of the evacuation, more candidates had disappeared. By dawn, only 3 remained. Lyra, Lady Catherine, and a quiet woman named Sarah who'd barely spoken throughout the entire selection process. "It's falling apart," one of Kyle's advisors said. "The conspiracy is bigger than we thought. They have people everywhere, guards, servants, even some of your own council, Majesty." "Then we cut out the rot," Kyle said. His voice was steady, but Lyra could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of lives lost on his shoulders. All of it, no matter how high it reaches. And the selection, Kael looked at Lyra, at this woman who'd followed him into fire without hesitation, who'd faced assassins and conspirators and never once backed down. The selection is over, he said quietly. I've made my choice. The room went silent. Your Majesty, the advisor began, you can't possibly mean, I mean exactly what I say. Kael's gaze never left Lyra's face. Lady Lyra Vance will be my queen, not because of trials or politics or family alliances, but because when the palace was burning and everyone else was running away, she ran toward the danger. Because she's proven herself 100 times over in ways no trial could measure. The nobles will never accept— The nobles, Kael interrupted, his voice going cold and hard, will accept what I tell them to accept, or they can join the conspirators in the dungeons. He crossed to Lyra and knelt before her. The Alpha King of Arkenfall, warrior and ruler, kneeling in his own study before a girl who'd been poisoned and discarded and left for dead. I'm not offering you freedom anymore, he said. I'm not offering you a choice to walk away, because I need you, Lyra, not as bait or partner or pawn, but as my queen, my equal, the person standing beside me when we face whatever comes next. Lyra's mind was reeling. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. There were supposed to be more trials, more time, more carefully orchestrated political theater. But the palace was burning and the conspiracy was crumbling, and the man before her was offering her everything she'd ever wanted: power, purpose, a place in the world that was hers by right and not by sufferance. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Kael stood, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic or anything like the stories she'd read as a girl. It was fierce and desperate and tasted like smoke and survival. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. We're going to burn this conspiracy to the ground, he said. Together. Together, Lyra agreed. Outside the study, the sun was rising over a wounded palace. Guards were still fighting fires. Physicians were tending to the injured. And somewhere in the city, the conspirators were regrouping, planning their next move. But in that moment, standing in the dawn light, with the king's arms around her and the weight of a crown settling onto her shoulders, Lyra Vance felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready. For the battle ahead, for the throne she'd claimed, for whatever came next, because she wasn't the broken girl they'd tried to destroy anymore. She was the future queen of Arkenfall, and she was done being underestimated. The announcement went out at noon. Lyra stood beside Kael on the palace balcony, overlooking the main courtyard, watching as thousands of citizens gathered below. The crowd was restless, frightened. Word of the arsenal explosion had spread through the city like wildfire, along with rumors of assassination attempts and conspiracy. They needed to see their king, needed to know the crown still stood. Ready? Kael asked quietly, his hand finding hers behind the stone balustrade where the crowd couldn't see. Lyra squeezed his fingers once, then released them. Ready. The herald stepped forward, his voice magically amplified to carry across the courtyard. People of Arkenfall, His Majesty, King Kael Draven, addresses you. The crowd fell silent. Lyra watched Kael step forward, and her breath caught, because he wasn't playing weak anymore. He stood tall and commanding, his shoulders back, his bearing that of a warrior king in his prime. No cane, no servant supporting him, just raw, undeniable power. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, confusion rippling through the masses like wind through wheat. My people, Kael's voice rang out, strong and clear. You have been lied to. For 3 years, I have allowed rumors of my weakness to spread unchallenged. I have played the cripple, the unstable ruler, the broken king. He paused, letting the words sink in. I did this to expose the rot within our kingdom, to identify those who would see Arkenfall torn apart by civil war, rather than submit to a crown they could not control. And last night, that rot revealed itself in blood and fire. The crowd was utterly silent now, hanging on every word. Conspirators within our own nobility attempted to assassinate me. They murdered an innocent woman. They set explosives in the heart of our palace, killing loyal guards who served the crown with honor. Kael's voice hardened. But they failed, and now they will face justice. He gestured, and guards began leading prisoners onto a lower balcony. Lady Helena, Lady Morgana, Lady Ashford, Lord Brennan, and a dozen others, all in chains. These nobles and their accomplices sought to destroy everything our kingdom stands for. They will be tried for treason, and if found guilty, they will pay the ultimate price. The crowd erupted into shouts, some calling for immediate execution, others demanding mercy, most simply stunned by the revelation. Kael raised his hand for silence. But there is more you must know. In the midst of this conspiracy, I found something unexpected. Someone who stood beside me when the palace burned, who risked everything to save lives when others were content to watch the kingdom fall. He turned and extended his hand to Lyra. She stepped forward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every eye in the courtyard was on her, this unknown girl from a minor house, this woman who'd been nothing and no one just days ago. "This is Lady Lyra Vance," Kael announced, "and she will be your queen." The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "The poisoned girl? The sick one?" "I was poisoned," Lyra said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "By my own family, to keep me weak and controlled. But I'm not weak anymore, and I will stand beside your king to root out every last traitor in this kingdom." The crowd didn't cheer, not yet, but she could see the shift in their expressions, curiosity replacing contempt, interest replacing dismissal. "The wedding will take place in 3 days," Kael continued, "and it will mark the beginning of a new era for Arkenfall. An era of truth instead of deception, strength instead of hidden weakness, unity instead of conspiracy." He pulled Lyra close, his arm around her waist in a gesture of unmistakable possession and partnership. "Any who oppose this union may speak now, but know that opposition to your queen is opposition to your king, and I am done tolerating traitors." The threat hung in the air, clear and cold. Then, from somewhere in the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "Long live King Kael!" Others picked it up, hesitantly at first, then with growing strength. "Long live the king! Long live the queen!" It wasn't universal support. Lyra could see plenty of skeptical faces, hear the muttered conversations. But it was a start. The people of Arkenfall were willing to give their strange new queen a chance. As they retreated from the balcony, Lyra felt the weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. She was engaged to a king, would be crowned queen in 3 days, had just been presented to an entire kingdom as their future ruler. "That went better than expected," Iris said, meeting them inside. "Though half the noble houses are probably drafting letters of protest as we speak." "Let them protest," Kael said. "We have bigger problems. The conspirators we caught were foot soldiers, not generals. Someone higher up is coordinating this, and they're still out there." He led them to a private council chamber where his most trusted advisors were already assembled. Lyra recognized the Minister of War, the captain of the Royal Guard, and several others whose loyalty Kael had verified personally. "Report," Kael commanded, settling into his chair and pulling Lyra down beside him. The Minister of War, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, spread a map across the table. "We've been interrogating the prisoners all morning. Most are refusing to talk, but we got lucky with one of Lord Brennan's servants. Apparently Brennan wasn't the mastermind. He was taking orders from someone else." "Who?" Lyra asked. He didn't know the name, but he did know the location of their next planned meeting. Marcus pointed to a spot on the map, a warehouse in the merchant district. "Tonight, 2 hours after sunset, the servant was supposed to deliver a message about the failed assassination." "It could be a trap," Iris warned. "Probably is," Kael agreed, "but it's also our best chance to identify the real power behind this conspiracy." He looked at Lyra. "I'm going. You're staying here where it's safe." "Absolutely not. Lyra, you said we were partners, equals. That means I don't sit in a tower while you walk into danger." She met his eyes without flinching. "Besides, they've seen you now, seen that you're not weak. But they still think I am. I could be useful." Kael's jaw tightened. "You could also be killed." "So could you. That hasn't stopped you from doing what needs to be done." They stared at each other across the table, neither willing to back down. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Majesty." "The girl has a point. The conspirators have seen you reveal your strength. They'll be watching for you now, prepared for your tactics. But Lady Lyra is an unknown quantity. They might underestimate her. They will definitely underestimate her, Iris added, which could work in our favor. Kael ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Fine, but you stay in the shadows. No heroics, no confrontations. We go in, we observe, we identify the players. Nothing more. Agreed, Lyra said, though they both knew it was a lie. When had anything in this palace gone according to plan? The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Lyra was fitted for dark clothing suitable for moving unseen through the city. Iris taught her the basics of knife fighting, not enough to make her dangerous, but enough that she might survive if things went wrong. The key is not to fight fair, Iris explained, demonstrating a move that involved using an opponent's weight against them. You're smaller, weaker. That means you have to be smarter, faster, more willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Whatever it takes, Lyra repeated, practicing the movement until her muscles remembered it. As evening approached, a servant brought news that Clara had arrived at the palace, demanding to see Lyra. Your stepsister, Kael said, reading the message. Probably sent by your stepmother to assess the situation. Probably. Lyra's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen Clara since leaving House Vance, hadn't spoken to her since learning the full extent of her sister's betrayal. Should I refuse to see her? That's your choice, but it might be useful to know what House Vance is planning, whether they're with us or against us. Lyra found Clara waiting in a small receiving room, twisting her rings the way she always did when nervous. Her sister looked pale and tired, as if she hadn't slept in days. Lyra, Clara stood when she entered, her eyes filling with tears. I heard what happened, the announcement. You're really going to marry him? I am. But he's... Clara stopped, seemed to realize that the old rumors no longer applied. Mother sent me. She wants to know what this means for House Vance, whether the betrothal to Lord Brennan still stands, or if she needs to find a new political ally now that Brennan is in the dungeons awaiting trial for treason, Lyra finished. You can tell our stepmother that House Vance's standing with the crown depends entirely on what she does next. If she was part of this conspiracy, she'll face the same justice as the others. If not, then perhaps we can find a way to coexist. Clara's hands were shaking. She wasn't part of it. I swear to you, Lyra, she knew nothing about the assassination attempts. Brennan approached her about the betrothal months ago, but she had no idea what he was really planning. And you, did you know? No, I would never... Clara's voice broke. I know you think I betrayed you, that I knew about the poison and said nothing. And you're right. I did know, or at least I suspected, but I was afraid. Afraid of Mother, afraid of losing everything if I spoke up. She sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. I've been living with that guilt every day since you left, wondering if you were suffering, if you hated me, if you were even alive. And when I heard about the explosions, about the assassination attempts, I thought... She couldn't finish. Lyra stood there, looking at this girl who'd been her sister, her friend, her betrayer. Part of her wanted to rage, to make Clara feel every bit of pain those years of poison had caused. But another part, the part that was learning to be queen, understood something more complex. Clara had been a victim too. A different kind of victim, trapped by fear and circumstance instead of poison. That didn't excuse her silence, but it made her human. I don't hate you, Lyra said quietly, but I don't trust you either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. However, I do need to know one thing. Lord Brennan, did he ever mention his plans to you? Anything about who he was working with, where he met with his co-conspirators? Clara looked up, hope flickering in her eyes at being given a chance to help. He used to disappear sometimes, late at night. He said it was business, but I followed him once. He went to a warehouse in the merchant district. I didn't see who he met with, but I heard voices, multiple people arguing about timing and resources. Did you recognize any of the voices? No, but one of them had an accent, northern, I think, from beyond the border kingdoms. Lyra's blood ran cold. A northern accent meant this conspiracy reached beyond Arkenfall's borders. meant foreign powers were involved in trying to destabilize the kingdom. "Thank you," she said. "That information might save lives tonight." "Tonight? Lyra, what are you planning?" "Nothing that concerns House Vance. Go home, Clara. Tell our stepmother to be very careful about the alliances she makes in the coming weeks. The throne is watching." After Clara left, Lyra found Kael in the armory, selecting weapons for the night's mission. "My sister told me something interesting," she said, and relayed Clara's information about the Northern accent. Kael's expression darkened. "The Northern Confederacy. I should have known. They've been trying to undermine Arkenfall for years, hoping to weaken us enough to invade. So this isn't just about removing you from the throne, it's about destroying the entire kingdom." "Exactly." He handed her a small knife in a wrist sheath. "All the more reason for you to stay here where it's safe. And all the more reason for me to come with you. You need every advantage you can get." 2 hours after sunset, they slipped out of the palace through a hidden passage that emerged in the city's lower district. Lyra was dressed in dark clothing borrowed from the guard, her hair hidden beneath a cap. Beside her, Kael moved like a shadow, all his earlier weakness revealed as the performance it had been. Behind them, a dozen of his most trusted soldiers followed at a distance, ready to move in when signaled. The warehouse was in a rundown section of the merchant district, surrounded by other abandoned buildings. Perfect for a secret meeting, isolated enough for privacy, common enough not to draw attention. "We go in through the roof," Kael whispered. "There's a skylight that should give us a view of the interior without being seen." They climbed using a rope Iris had secured earlier in the day, pulling themselves up onto the warehouse roof with aching arms. Lyra's muscles screamed. She still wasn't fully recovered from years of poison, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. The skylight was grimy and partially covered, but through it they could see the warehouse floor below. And what they saw made Lyra's breath catch. At least 20 people were gathered around a large table. Nobles, merchants, even a few faces she recognized from Kael's own guard. All of them conspirators. All of them traitors. And at the head of the table, directing the meeting with calm authority, was someone Lyra never expected to see. Lady Margaret Vance, her stepmother. "No," Lyra breathed. "Clara said she wasn't involved. She promised—" "Clara lied," Kael said grimly. "Or your stepmother lied to her. Either way, we have our answer." Below, Margaret was speaking. "The assassination failed, but that's actually worked in our favor. The king has revealed himself as strong, which makes him seem more dangerous. The people will demand he be removed before he becomes a tyrant. All we need to do is fan those flames." "And the girl?" someone asked. "This new queen he's chosen?" "A distraction. She means nothing. She is nothing." Margaret's voice was cold with contempt. "I made sure of that years ago when I started feeding her the poison. She'll be dead within the year from the after effects, or the stress of being queen will finish what the Nightshade started. Either way, she's not a threat." Lyra felt Kael tense beside her, felt his hand find hers in the darkness. "The real concern," Margaret continued, "is the Northern Confederacy. They're growing impatient. They want Arkenfall destabilized now, before the spring campaigns begin. Which means we need to move up our timeline." A man stepped forward, tall, with a northern accent. "My lords have been generous with their support, but they expect results. The next attempt on the king's life must succeed." "It will," Margaret assured him. "We have someone in place, someone close to the king, someone he trusts completely. When they strike, it will be swift and certain." Lyra's mind raced. Someone close to Kael, someone he trusted. That narrowed it down to his inner circle, his advisors, his personal guard, maybe even— "Why, Iris," she whispered. "Could they have turned Iris?" "No," Kael said immediately. "I'd stake my life on her loyalty." "You might be," Lyra pointed out. Below, the meeting was breaking up. The conspirators were dispersing, heading for different exits. "We need to follow your stepmother," Kael said. "Find out where she's going, who else she's meeting with." But as they moved to climb down from the roof, Lyra's foot slipped on the grimy skylight. The glass cracked with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet night. Every head below turned upward. "Run!" Kael shouted. They scrambled across the roof as shouts erupted below. Lyra heard the sound of doors crashing open, boots pounding on cobblestones. The conspirators were giving chase. "The rope!" Kael called, but it was too late. Someone had already cut it loose from below. They were trapped on the roof with enemies closing in from all sides. "There!" Lyra spotted a gap between this building and the next, maybe 6 feet across, 3 stories above the alley below. "We can jump it! That's insane! So is staying here to be captured." Without waiting for his response, Lyra backed up, ran, and leaped. For a heart-stopping moment, she was airborne, the alley yawning beneath her, death a very real possibility. Then her hands caught the opposite roof's edge and she pulled herself up, gasping. Kael landed beside her a moment later and they were running again, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, while behind them, the conspirators struggled to follow. "The next one's too far," Kael yelled as they approached a wider gap. Lyra spotted a clothesline strung between the buildings. Without thinking, she grabbed it and swung across, landing hard on the opposite roof and rolling to absorb the impact. Kael followed, and together they kept running until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Finally, they collapsed in the shadow of a chimney, both breathing hard. "That was the most reckless, dangerous, foolish thing I've ever seen," Kael said. "But it worked." He laughed, really laughed, and pulled her into a fierce kiss. "You're going to give me a heart attack before this is over." "If I don't, my stepmother probably will." The humor drained from his face. "She's been playing us from the beginning. The poison, the sacrifice, even sending Clara here, all of it designed to position House Vance for power once I was dead." "She called me nothing," Lyra said quietly. "Said I'd be dead within the year from the after effects of the poison." "You won't be." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can. Because you're stronger than she ever understood, stronger than the poison, stronger than her schemes." Kael cupped her face in his hands. "And because I'm going to make sure you have access to the best healers in the kingdom. We'll purge every last trace of that poison from your system if it takes years." Lyra leaned into his touch, feeling something shift in her chest. This wasn't just political alliance anymore. Wasn't just partnership in a dangerous game. This was real. "We need to get back to the palace," she said. "Warn the others. Figure out who the traitor in your inner circle is before they strike." They made their way through the city under cover of darkness, using back alleys and hidden paths. By the time they reached the palace, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. Iris met them at the secret entrance, her face grim. "Thank the old gods you're alive. We've had 3 more assassination attempts in the night. Someone tried to poison the water supply, another tried to set fire to the eastern wing, and a third actually made it into the king's chambers before the guards stopped him." "Who was it?" Kael demanded. "Captain Marcus, the Minister of War, one of Kael's most trusted advisors, the man who'd suggested Lyra accompany them to the warehouse. He's in the dungeons now," Iris continued, "but he managed to kill 2 guards before we subdued him. He was ranting about how the kingdom needed new leadership, how you were leading Arkenfall to ruin." Kael's face had gone pale. "Marcus has served the crown for 30 years. I thought I knew him. Thought I could trust him." "That's what they're counting on," Lyra said. "They're turning the people you trust into weapons, making you question everyone around you." "Then we stop questioning and start acting." Kael's voice hardened. "Iris, call an emergency session of the council. Every advisor, every minister, every person with access to the throne room. We're going to smoke out the rest of these traitors today." The council chamber was packed an hour later, filled with confused and frightened nobles who'd been summoned without explanation. Lyra stood beside Kael's throne, very conscious of the stares directed her way. When everyone had assembled, Kael rose. "Last night, I witnessed a meeting of conspirators who seek to destroy this kingdom. Among them were nobles, merchants, and foreign agents working for the Northern Confederacy, and leading them all was Lady Margaret Vance." Gasps and whispers filled the chamber. Lyra kept her expression neutral, refusing to show the pain of having her suspicions confirmed so publicly. "Lady Margaret is hereby declared a traitor to the crown. She and all her co-conspirators will be hunted down and brought to justice. Furthermore, any house found to have supported her conspiracy will be stripped of lands and titles." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "However, I am offering one chance for redemption. Any person in this room who has knowledge of the conspiracy but has not yet acted against the crown may come forward now with information. Cooperation will be rewarded with mercy. Continued silence will be treated as complicity." The chamber was silent. Then slowly, a young nobleman in the back stood. "Your Majesty, my father received letters from Lady Margaret, offers of alliance, promises of power if certain actions were taken against the throne. He burned the letters and refused her offers, but I thought you should know." "Thank you, Lord Devon. Your father's loyalty is noted and will be remembered." One by one, others came forward. Not everyone. Lyra could see nobles who kept their silence, who would undoubtedly need to be investigated further. But enough stepped forward to give them names, locations, details of the conspiracy's reach. It was a start, a crack in the wall of silence and fear that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish. When the session ended, Kael pulled Lyra aside. "We're going after your stepmother tonight. I have her location. One of the informants knew where she's hiding. I'm taking a full company of guards, and before you argue, you're not coming with us." "Kael, this isn't negotiable, Lyra. Margaret poisoned you for 6 years. She called you nothing. She's been trying to kill me and destroy the kingdom. I'm not giving her a chance to finish what she started by putting you in harm's way." He kissed her forehead, gentle despite the steel in his voice. "Stay here. Help Iris coordinate the investigation. And please, for once, don't do anything reckless." He left before she could argue, taking half the palace guard with him. Lyra stood in the empty council chamber, frustration and fear warring in her chest. Margaret was out there, still plotting, still dangerous. And Kyle was walking into what might be another trap. "He's right, you know," Iris said from the doorway. "You being there would only distract him, make him worry about protecting you instead of focusing on the mission." "I know. Lyra sank into a chair. "I want to face her. After everything she did to me, I want to look her in the eye and show her that I survived, that I won." "You will. When they bring her back in chains, you'll have that chance." But they didn't bring Margaret back in chains. 6 hours later, as night fell over the palace, Kael returned with his guards. Their faces were grim, their hands empty. "She was gone," Kael said, exhaustion and anger evident in every word. "The safe house was abandoned. Someone tipped her off. She cleared out hours before we arrived." "Then she's still out there," Lyra said, "still planning." "Yes, but she's running now, not plotting. We've seized her assets, arrested her known associates, cut off her resources. She's dangerous, but she's also desperate. That makes her sloppy." He pulled Lyra into his arms, holding her tight. "We're going to find her. I promise you that. And when we do, you'll get your chance to face her." 2 days later, the wedding preparations began in earnest despite the ongoing crisis. Kael insisted that the ceremony proceed as planned. It would show the kingdom that the crown was strong, unafraid, defiant in the face of conspiracy. Lyra was fitted for a gown that made her breath catch. White silk embroidered with silver thread, designed to shimmer like starlight. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This was who she was now, not the sick girl behind the window, not even the survivor who'd walked through fire, but something new, something powerful. A queen. The night before the wedding, Clara came to her chambers one last time. "Mother is gone," she said quietly. "Disappeared. The guards seized everything, our home, our lands, our titles. I have nothing left." "I'm sorry," Lyra said, and meant it. "Are you? After everything she did to you, I thought you'd be glad to see House Vance destroyed." "House Vance isn't you. You were a victim of her schemes too, in your own way." Lyra studied her stepsister. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. The betrothal to Brennan is obviously void. I have no prospects, no family who'll take me in. I'll probably have to find work as a companion or governess. Try to rebuild some kind of life." An idea formed in Lyra's mind. A reckless, probably foolish idea, but also one that felt right. "Or you could stay here, at the palace." Claire's head snapped up. "What?" "You said you wanted to help, that you felt guilty for your silence, so help me now. Be my lady in waiting, my advisor on matters of the noble houses. You know them all, know their alliances and grudges. That knowledge could be valuable." "You would trust me? After I betrayed you?" "No," Lyra admitted, "but I'm willing to give you a chance to earn that trust. Everyone deserves that much. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I won't let you down. I swear it. Better not. Because if you betray me again, it won't just be me you answer to. It'll be the king. On the morning of the wedding, Lyra woke before dawn and stood at her window watching the city come to life below. In a few hours, she would walk down that aisle and become queen, would take vows that bound her to Kyle and to Arkenfall forever. Nervous? Iris asked from the doorway. Terrified, Lyra admitted. What if I'm not ready? What if I make a mistake that costs lives? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. That's all any of us can do. Iris crossed to stand beside her. The king chose you not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Because when everyone else was performing for him, you showed him the truth. Don't lose that now. The ceremony was held in the palace's great cathedral, attended by every noble house that remained loyal to the crown. Lyra walked down the aisle in her shimmering gown, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Kyle waited for her at the altar, magnificent in his formal regalia. But it was his eyes she focused on, those gray eyes that had seen through her weakness to the strength beneath. The vows were traditional, ancient words spoken by countless rulers before them. But when Kyle slipped the queen's crown onto her head, a delicate circle of silver set with diamonds, Lyra felt the weight of them settle into her bones. She was queen now, not by birth or political arrangement, but by choice, by surviving, by refusing to be broken. I present to you, the officiant announced, King Kyle and Queen Lyra of Arkenfall. The cathedral erupted in cheers. Not everyone was happy. Lyra could see the sour faces in the back rows, the nobles who resented her rapid rise. But enough people were celebrating to drown out the dissent. As they processed back down the aisle, Kyle leaned close. How does it feel to be queen? Lyra looked out at the assembled crowd, at the people who doubted her, underestimated her, tried to destroy her. She thought of her stepmother still out there somewhere, probably hearing the news and seething. It feels, she said with a fierce smile, like winning. The celebration feast that followed lasted into the night. Lyra moved through the crowds accepting congratulations, dancing with nobles who weeks ago wouldn't have acknowledged her existence, playing the role of gracious queen, while her mind cataloged threats and allies with ruthless efficiency. Near midnight, Iris approached with urgent news. We found Lady Margaret. She's holed up in a fortress near the northern border, protected by what looks like a full company of Confederacy soldiers. Kyle's jaw tightened. She's made her final alliance, then. Sold out to foreign powers completely. We can't assault the fortress without risking open war with the Confederacy, one of his advisors said. We need a different approach. Lyra set down her wine cup, an idea forming. Let me go to her. Every head turned toward her. Absolutely not, Kyle said immediately. Hear me out. She thinks I'm weak, remember? Thinks the poison will kill me soon anyway. If I go under a flag of truce, offer to negotiate, she might let her guard down, give us an opening. Or she might kill you the moment you're in range. Maybe. But she also might want to gloat, to see the daughter she tried to destroy begging for mercy. Lyra met his eyes. I can use that. Use her arrogance against her. The chamber fell silent as Kyle considered. Finally, he shook his head. It's too dangerous. Everything we've done has been dangerous. This is just one more risk, not one I'm willing to take. Lyra stood, drawing herself up to her full height, the crown glinting on her brow. Your Majesty, she said formally, I am not asking your permission. I am your queen, and I am telling you what needs to be done. The power dynamic in the room shifted. Nobles exchanged glances, uncertain how the new king and queen would navigate this first real disagreement. Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're right. You are the queen. And if this is what you believe needs to happen, then I'll support it, but not alone. I'm coming with you. We face her together. Lyra felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was partnership. This was what they'd built together, mutual respect, trust, the willingness to challenge each other and still stand united. Together, she agreed. 3 days later, they rode north with a small escort, heading toward the fortress where Margaret had made her final stand. The letter Lyra had sent ahead had been simple. She wanted to negotiate terms for House Vance's surrender, to spare Clara and the innocent servants from punishment. Margaret's response had been equally simple. Come alone and unarmed, or don't come at all. They were breaking that condition, but carefully, Kael and a dozen guards hidden in the surrounding forest, ready to move in at Lyra's signal. As Lyra approached the fortress gates under her flag of truce, her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. This was the moment she'd been building toward since she first stopped drinking that poisoned tea. The gates opened. Margaret stood in the courtyard, flanked by northern soldiers, looking as cold and controlled as ever. So, her stepmother said, the dying girl has become a queen. How unexpected. Lyra dismounted, walking forward until they stood face to face. I'm not dying, and I'm not here to beg. Then why are you here? To give you one chance. Surrender now, face trial, and I'll ensure Clara is protected. Refuse, and when we storm this fortress, and we will, everyone inside dies, including you. Margaret laughed, sharp and bitter. You think you've won because you wore a crown? You think that changes what you are? She leaned close, her voice dropping to a hiss. You're still the weak, pathetic girl I spent 6 years destroying. Still nothing but... Lyra's fist connected with Margaret's jaw, snapping her head back. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Northern soldiers drew weapons. Margaret staggered, blood streaming from her split lip. And Lyra stood there, hand throbbing, feeling more alive than she'd ever felt. I am Queen Lyra of Arkenfall, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the courtyard. And I am done being nothing. Kael and his guards poured through the gates, having waited for exactly this signal. The northern soldiers found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, their diplomatic protection void the moment Margaret had harbored them in an act of treason. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. When it ended, Margaret knelt in chains before her stepdaughter, her cold mask finally cracked. You were supposed to die, she whispered. The poison should have killed you. You should have used a stronger dose, Lyra said. Then she turned her back on the woman who'd tried to destroy her and walked away. Because Margaret was right about one thing. Lyra had been nothing, had been broken and poisoned and left to fade away. But she'd chosen to survive, to fight, to become something her enemies never saw coming. And now, standing beside her king with her crown gleaming and her stepmother in chains, Lyra Vance finally understood what power really meant. It wasn't about being feared or being perfect or being unbreakable. It was about choosing, again and again, to stand up when they tried to knock you down. And she would never stop standing, and she would never stop standing. The words echoed in Lyra's mind as she watched guards drag Margaret away to the prison wagons. Her stepmother's face was a mask of fury and disbelief, unable to comprehend how the girl she'd spent 6 years destroying had become the woman who'd just defeated her. Are you all right? Kael appeared at Lyra's side, concern etched into his features. She flexed her sore hand, already feeling the bruise forming across her knuckles. I've wanted to do that for 6 years. I'm better than all right. You hit a prisoner of the crown. I hit a traitor who poisoned me and tried to destroy the kingdom. There's a difference. Kael's smile was fierce and proud. Yes, there is. And every noble who hears about it will understand exactly what kind of queen they're dealing with now. The ride back to the capital took 2 days, with Margaret and the captured northern soldiers secured in the prison convoy. Lyra rode beside Kael, watching the landscape change from wild frontier back to settled farmland, feeling the weight of what came next settling onto her shoulders. The trial will be complicated, Kael said as they made camp on the first night. Margaret has allies still, houses that will try to defend her or at least minimize her crimes. And the northern soldiers complicate things further. Executing them could be seen as an act of war. Then we make sure the truth is so undeniable that no one can defend her, Lyra said. We present evidence, witnesses, documentation of every crime. We show the kingdom exactly who she is and what she tried to do. And when they call for her execution? Lyra was quiet for a moment, staring into the campfire. 6 years ago, she would have said she wanted Margaret dead, would have dreamed of revenge, of watching her stepmother suffer as she'd made Lyra suffer. But the woman she'd become, the queen she was still learning to be, understood something more complex. Then we give them justice, not revenge. We follow the law, let the evidence speak, and accept whatever verdict the court renders, because that's what separates us from them. We don't poison and plot and murder in the shadows. We stand in the light and let truth be our weapon. Kale reached across the space between them and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. When I first saw you in that lineup of terrified candidates, I thought I saw strength hiding beneath weakness. But I was wrong. You weren't hiding strength, you were building it. Everything that happened to you, every betrayal and loss and moment of suffering, you turned into something unbreakable. I don't feel unbreakable, Lyra admitted. I still wake up some mornings expecting to feel weak, expecting the poison to drag me back down into that gray half-life. But it doesn't, and it won't. Because you're free of it now, free of her, free to become whoever you choose to be. They reached the capital at midday, and the entire city turned out to watch the procession. Word had already spread. The new queen had personally confronted the traitor who'd tried to destroy her, had captured her own stepmother, and brought her to justice. The crowd's reaction was unlike anything Lyra had experienced. Not pity, not contempt, but something close to awe. She'd proven herself in ways they understood, through courage, through direct action, through the kind of frontier justice that resonated in Arkenfall's harsh culture. "Long live the Queen!" someone shouted, and others picked it up, the chant rolling through the streets like thunder. "Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen!" Lyra felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She sat tall in her saddle, her crown glinting in the sunlight, and acknowledged the cheers with regal composure. This was what it meant to be queen. Not just wearing a crown or sitting on a throne, but earning the respect and loyalty of people who'd started by doubting her. The trial began 3 days later in the Great Hall, with every noble house in attendance. The hall was packed to capacity. This wasn't just about one woman's crimes, but about the conspiracy that had nearly torn the kingdom apart. Margaret stood in the center of the hall in chains, her elegant composure cracked, but not completely broken. She met Lyra's eyes across the room with something that might have been hatred, or might have been grudging respect. Kale presided over the proceedings from the Iron Throne, with Lyra seated beside him in a smaller but no less magnificent chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. They ruled together, partners in truth as well as title. The evidence was presented methodically. Letters detailing the conspiracy, testimony from servants who'd witnessed the poisoning, confessions from captured conspirators, financial records showing payments from the Northern Confederacy. Piece by piece, the case was built until it was undeniable. When it was Lyra's turn to testify, she stood and walked to the center of the hall, standing only feet from Margaret. "For 6 years," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I believed I was dying of a mysterious illness. I trusted the medicine I was given. I trusted the family that claimed to care for me. And all the while, I was being systematically poisoned to keep me weak and controllable." She turned to address the assembled nobles. Lady Margaret didn't just commit treason against the crown. She committed it against a child in her care, against family, against every law of hospitality and protection that our society holds sacred. And when her plot to control House Vance through me failed, she escalated to conspiracy against the king himself, working with foreign powers to destabilize our entire kingdom. "These are lies," Margaret shouted. "Fabrications by a girl who's manipulated the king into—" "Silence!" Kale's voice cracked like a whip. "You will speak when asked to defend yourself, not before." The trial continued for hours, with witness after witness confirming the conspiracy. By the time the sun began to set through the high windows, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. The Council of Judges, 7 nobles chosen for their loyalty and integrity, retired to deliberate. They returned within an hour. "We find Lady Margaret Vance guilty of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, poisoning, and collaboration with foreign powers. The sentence, as prescribed by law, is death." A murmur ran through the crowd. Margaretta's face went white, then red with fury. "This is a mockery. That girl has no right to sit in judgment over me. She's nothing but—" "She is your queen," Kale interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. "And you will address her with the respect her position demands, or I will have you gagged for the remainder of these proceedings." Margaret's mouth snapped shut, her eyes blazing with impotent rage. Kael turned to Lyra. "Your Majesty, as the primary victim of Lady Margaret's crimes, you have the right to speak to the sentence. Do you wish to exercise that right? This was it. The moment where Lyra could demand her stepmother's immediate execution, could watch the woman who'd poisoned her die in chains. Every eye in the hall was on her, waiting to see what kind of queen she would be. Lyra stood, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. The sentence of death is just and lawful. Lady Margaret's crimes warrant nothing less. She paused, let the words hang in the air. However, I propose a modification. Let the execution be stayed for 1 year. In that time, let Lady Margaret provide full testimony about every aspect of the conspiracy, every name, every meeting, every foreign contact. Let her cooperation buy her a swift death instead of a slow one, and let her remaining months serve the kingdom she tried to destroy. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Kael's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she could see approval in his eyes. "You would show her mercy?" one of the judges asked. "Not mercy, strategy. We've caught one network of conspirators, but there may be others. Lady Margaret has information that could save lives, prevent future plots. I'd rather use that information than waste it out of personal revenge." She turned to face Margaret directly. "You called me nothing. You tried to make me nothing. But I've learned that true power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about making them useful. So you'll spend your last year serving the kingdom you betrayed. And when your time comes, you'll face it, knowing that the nothing you created became a queen who was stronger than you ever imagined." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Kael spoke. "The court accepts Queen Lyra's proposal. Lady Margaret Vance will be detained under close guard, required to provide full cooperation with ongoing investigations. At the end of 1 year, if her cooperation has been satisfactory, the sentence of death will be carried out swiftly and without prolonged suffering. If she refuses cooperation, the execution will proceed immediately." Margaret stared at Lyra with an expression impossible to read. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I accept the terms." As guards led her away, Lyra sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. The hall was clearing, nobles departing in small groups, their conversations animated. The trial was over, the conspiracy was broken, and Lyra had proven herself capable of something her stepmother never could have understood, the strength to choose justice over vengeance. "That was well done," Kael said quietly, his hand finding hers. "Though I suspect half the court expected you to demand her head immediately. Half the court doesn't understand that dead enemies can't provide information about living ones. We still don't know how deep the Northern Confederacy's infiltration goes. Margaret can help us root it out completely. And when the year is up?" Lyra's expression hardened. "Then justice will be served. I can be strategic without being merciful." Over the following weeks, as Margaret provided testimony from her cell, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. It reached far deeper than anyone had imagined, into merchant guilds, military companies, even some of the king's own household staff. Each revelation was dealt with swiftly and publicly. Trials were held, sentences passed, positions filled with people whose loyalty was unquestionable. Slowly, methodically, Lyra and Kael purged the rot from Arkenfall's power structure. And with each decision, each judgment, each act of governance, Lyra felt herself growing into the role she'd claimed. She was no longer playing at being queen. She was being queen, with all the complexity and difficulty that entailed. Clara proved invaluable during this period. Her knowledge of the noble houses, their alliances and grudges, helped Lyra navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. And slowly, carefully, the sisters began to rebuild something that resembled trust. "I'll never stop being sorry," Clara said one evening as they reviewed the next day's appointments. "For not speaking up, for being a coward when you needed an ally." "I know," Lyra said, "and I'll never stop remembering it, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. You're proving yourself now, and that matters." "Does it? Will you ever truly forgive me?" Lyra considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Maybe forgiveness isn't the right goal. Maybe what we need is something new. A relationship built on who we are now, not who we were then. You're my lady-in-waiting and advisor. I trust you to do that job well. Whether we ever become sisters again in the way we were as children." She shrugged. "Time will tell." It wasn't the answer Clara wanted, but it was honest. And honesty, Lyra had learned, was worth more than comfortable lies. 3 months after the trial, a delegation arrived from the Northern Confederacy. They came under a flag of truce requesting an audience with the king and queen. It could be a trap, Iris warned as they prepared for the meeting. Everything could be a trap, Kael countered, but we can't ignore a diplomatic overture, especially not when we're still rooting out their agents. The delegation was led by a man named Victor Stormwind, a high-ranking official in the Confederacy's governing council. He was tall and severe, with ice-blue eyes that missed nothing. "Your Majesties," he said, bowing with precise formality, "the Northern Confederacy wishes to express its regret regarding recent unfortunate events."
Regret?
Lyra's voice was cold. "Your government supported a conspiracy to murder the king and destabilize our kingdom. That goes rather beyond unfortunate events." Victor's expression didn't change. "The individuals who acted in our name did so without official sanction. They have been recalled and will face consequences for exceeding their authority." "How convenient that you can disavow them now that they've failed." "Queen Lyra speaks truth," Kael added. "We have documentation proving the conspiracy was funded by Confederacy gold, coordinated with Confederacy agents. Don't insult us by pretending this was rogue action." Victor was silent for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "Very well. The truth is that elements within our government believed Arkenfall was weak, ripe for exploitation. King Kael's performance of weakness convinced them that destabilizing your kingdom would be easy. They were wrong." "And now?" Lyra asked. "Now those elements have been removed from power by others who take a longer view. The Confederacy has no interest in a prolonged conflict with a strong Arkenfall. We prefer mutually beneficial trade and peaceful borders to expensive wars." He produced a sealed document. "This is a formal treaty proposal. Non-aggression, defined borders, trade agreements favorable to both parties. Consider it an apology of sorts, though we would never call it that publicly." Kael and Lyra exchanged glances. This was unexpected. They'd been preparing for increased hostilities, not peace overtures. "We'll review the proposal," Kael said carefully. "But understand this. If any Confederacy agent is found operating within our borders again, treaty or no treaty, we will consider it an act of war." "Understood, Your Majesty." "And if any of your agents are found in our territory, we will extend the same courtesy of immediate expulsion or execution." Victor's smile was sharp. "We understand each other perfectly, I think." After the delegation departed, Lyra and Kael spent hours reviewing the proposed treaty with their advisors. It was surprisingly fair, genuinely beneficial to both kingdoms rather than a trap or a trick. "They're afraid of you," one advisor observed, "of both of you. The king who pretended to be weak to expose his enemies, and the queen who turned poison into power. The Confederacy likes to prey on weakness, but you've proven Arkenfall is anything but weak." "Then we accept the treaty," Kael decided. "But we stay vigilant. Peace is good, but we verify every word and watch for betrayal." Lyra nodded agreement, but part of her was marveling at what they'd accomplished. 3 months ago, they'd been fighting for survival. Now they were negotiating from a position of strength, reshaping Arkenfall's relationship with its most dangerous neighbor. As spring turned to summer, the kingdom began to heal. The conspiracy's exposure had been painful, but it had also cleansed the rot from the system. New nobles rose to fill vacant positions, chosen for competence and loyalty rather than bloodline or politics. And Lyra found herself actually enjoying the work of governance. She established new programs for the poor, funded healers to travel to remote villages, created laws protecting servants from abuse by their employers. Each initiative was a deliberate rejection of everything Margaret represented. "You're building something," Kael observed one evening as they reviewed her latest proposal. "A school for children of common birth funded by the crown. Not just ruling, but transforming." "Is that allowed?" Lyra asked with a slight smile. "Transforming the kingdom?" "You're the queen. Everything is allowed." He pulled her close, his arms warm around her waist. "Though I suspect some of the older nobles are having heart palpitations at how fast you're moving. Let them. They had their chance to build a better kingdom and chose conspiracy instead. Now it's our turn." That night, as Lyra stood at her window looking out over the city, her kingdom, she thought about the girl she'd been, the ghost behind the glass, watching life happen without her. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone stronger and stranger and infinitely more complicated. But she carried that girl's memories, her pain, her determination to survive, and she'd use all of it to build something worth surviving for. The one-year mark of Margaret's sentence arrived on a cold autumn morning. Lyra had almost forgotten about it, had been so consumed with the work of governance that her stepmother had faded to a distant concern. But the law was the law, and Margaret had provided testimony as promised. The execution was scheduled for dawn. "You don't have to attend," Kael said as Lyra dressed in black that morning. "Yes, I do. She needs to see that I survived, that I became everything she tried to prevent." The execution ground was outside the city walls, a bare stretch of earth where traitors met their end. A small crowd had gathered, mostly officials and nobles required to witness, plus a few common folk who'd arrived to see justice done. Margaret was brought out in chains, her elegant features haggard from a year in captivity, but when she saw Lyra standing on the observation platform, something like a smile crossed her face. "So you came to watch," she called out. "I wondered if you would." "I came to see justice served," Lyra replied, "as is my duty as queen." "Your duty?" Margaret laughed, bitter and broken. "Do you know what my duty was? To protect Clara, to secure her future. Everything I did was for her." "You poisoned me for her? Tried to destroy the kingdom for her?" "I did what I had to do to survive in a world that gives women no power except what they can steal or manipulate. You think you've won because you wear a crown? You're still just a pawn in a man's game." "No," Lyra said quietly. "I'm a queen in my own right. And the difference between us is that I chose to earn my power through service and sacrifice, while you chose to steal it through poison and betrayal." She nodded to the executioner. "Proceed." Margaret was led to the block, forced to her knees. In her last moment, she looked up at Lyra one final time. "I should have used a stronger dose," she said, echoing Lyra's words from their confrontation at the fortress. "Yes," Lyra agreed. "You should have." The axe fell. Lyra watched without flinching, feeling not triumph or satisfaction, but a strange, hollow sense of completion. This chapter of her life was closed. The woman who'd tried to destroy her was gone, and she could finally, truly, move forward. As the crowd dispersed, Clara appeared at Lyra's side. Her face was pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She was still my mother," Clara whispered. "Even after everything, I loved her." "I know," Lyra said, and pulled her sister into an embrace. "And I'm sorry you had to lose her this way." "Are you? After what she did to you?" Lyra thought about it, really considered the question. "I'm sorry that you're in pain. I'm sorry that she chose the path she did, that she valued power more than family. But I'm not sorry justice was served. Both things can be true." Clara nodded against her shoulder, and they stood there together, two sisters who'd survived the same poisoned household, finally beginning to heal. Winter came to Arkenfall, bringing snow and celebration. The kingdom had stabilized, the conspiracy was broken, and peace treaties were holding. It was time for something new. Lyra organized a festival, the first of what she planned to make an annual tradition. For 3 days, the palace gates were thrown open, and common people were invited to tour the grounds, see the throne room, meet their queen. "This is unprecedented," one of the older nobles complained. "Commoners in the palace. It's unseemly." "It's necessary," Lyra countered. "There are people. They deserve to see that their queen is real, accessible, someone who understands their lives. Besides, I'm common-born myself by the standards of most royal houses. I haven't forgotten where I came from." The festival was a massive success. Thousands of people came through, awed by the palace's grandeur, but more awed by the fact that the queen herself walked among them, spoke with them, listened to their concerns. On the final night, there was a feast in the great hall, nobles and commoners seated together, the rigid hierarchy temporarily suspended. Lyra stood to address the crowd, feeling the weight of all those eyes upon her. "A year ago," she said, "I was nobody, a sick girl in a forgotten manor, poisoned and powerless. If you'd told me then that I would stand here as your queen, I would have thought you mad." Laughter rippled through the hall. "But I learned something in that year of suffering and survival, I learned that power isn't about birth or breeding or the family you come from. It's about the choices you make when everything is against you. It's about standing up when they try to knock you down. It's about turning pain into purpose and weakness into strength. She looked around the hall, meeting eyes both noble and common. We've been through darkness together, conspiracy and betrayal, fire and blood. But we survived. And we did it by standing together, by refusing to let fear and division destroy us. That's the Arkenfall I want to build. Not a kingdom of rigid hierarchies and hidden plots, but one where strength is measured by character and anyone can rise as high as their courage can carry them. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People were standing, cheering, nobles and commoners united in a moment of shared hope. Kael appeared at her side, taking her hand. "You're giving them revolution disguised as inspiration," he murmured in her ear. "I'm giving them truth," she countered. "Whether they choose revolution is up to them." Later that night, alone in their chambers, Kael pulled Lyra close. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing to stay instead of taking the freedom I offered?" Lyra thought about the girl behind the window, the ghost who'd watched life happen without her. She thought about the choice she'd made in his study all those months ago. "No," she said. "Freedom would have been easier, safer. But this, building something, making a difference, proving that the girl they tried to destroy could become a queen they couldn't ignore. This is better than freedom. This is purpose. Even with all the danger, all the responsibility? Especially with the danger and responsibility. I was safe when I was powerless, and safety nearly killed me. I'd rather face 1,000 dangers as queen than spend one more day as nothing." Spring returned to Arkenfall, bringing warmth and renewal. In the palace gardens, where Lyra had once watched through glass as others enjoyed freedom, she now walked freely, planning new initiatives and welcoming delegations. One afternoon, Clara brought her surprising news. "I've been offered a position, ambassador to the Eastern Kingdoms. They want someone with connections to both common and noble houses, someone who understands delicate politics." "That's wonderful," Lyra said, meaning it. "You'd be brilliant at it. It would mean leaving, being away from court, from you." Lyra took her sister's hands. "Clara, you don't have to stay here out of guilt or obligation. If this is what you want, if this is your chance to build your own life instead of living in the shadow of our past, then take it. But we're just starting to rebuild. We'll always be rebuilding. That's what family does. But you need to find your own purpose, not just support mine." Lyra smiled. "Besides, having a sister as an ambassador sounds politically useful." Clara laughed, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, for being the better person when I didn't deserve it. You're my sister. You'll always deserve another chance, even when you're being insufferable." They embraced, and Lyra felt another piece of her past settle into place. Not forgotten, not erased, but integrated into who she was becoming. A year and a half after the wedding, on a warm summer evening, Lyra stood on the palace balcony watching the sun set over her kingdom. The city below was thriving, trade was up, crime was down, and the people moved through their lives with a security they hadn't known in years. Kael joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The Northern Ambassador sends his regards," he said, "along with a proposal for expanded trade routes. Accept it, but verify everything. Trust doesn't mean abandoning caution." Spoken like a true queen. Lyra leaned back against him, feeling content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Do you remember what you asked me that first day? In your study, when you offered me freedom? I asked what you wanted to be. I said I wanted to be free. But I was wrong. Or not wrong exactly, but incomplete." She turned in his arms to face him. "I didn't just want freedom from poison and control. I wanted freedom to be myself, completely and without apology. To use everything I'd survived to build something that mattered." "And have you? Found that freedom?" Lyra looked out over the kingdom, her kingdom, and smiled. Every single day. 5 years after Lyra had first stepped into the palace as a candidate for queen, Arkenfall celebrated the anniversary of her coronation. The festival had grown from 3 days to a full week, with celebrations spreading throughout the kingdom. Lyra moved through the crowds in the palace courtyard, greeting people who'd come from every corner of the realm. She was different now than the frightened girl who'd faced her first trial, more confident, more certain of her power and purpose. But she carried that girl with her always, remembered what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. It made her a better queen, more compassionate, more aware of how easily power could corrupt. Your Majesty. A young girl pushed through the crowd, maybe 10 years old, with wild dark hair and fierce eyes. Is it true you were poisoned? That you were sick for years and years? It's true, Lyra confirmed, kneeling to the girl's level. But you got better? You got strong? I did. It took time and help and a lot of determination, but yes, I got strong. The girl's eyes shone. My ma says I can be anything I want if I'm strong enough. Says it doesn't matter that we're just farmers, that with the new schools and the Queen's programs, I could even be a scholar or a healer or maybe even work in the palace someday. Lyra felt her throat tighten with emotion. Your ma is right. You can be anything you're willing to work for. I'm proof of that. Will you remember me? The girl asked. When I'm grown up and I come work in the palace. What's your name? Elena, like your mother. Lyra took the girl's hands, feeling the circle complete itself. Her mother Elena, who'd been called mad for refusing to be controlled. Herself, who'd been called weak for being controlled. And now this child, growing up in a kingdom where strength and potential mattered more than birth. I'll remember you, Elena, and I'll expect great things. As the girl skipped away, Kael appeared with news. The physicians have confirmed it. You're pregnant. Lyra's hand went to her still flat stomach, wonder and fear warring in her chest. Are you sure? After everything the poison did to my body, I didn't think... They're sure. Due in 7 months. She thought about carrying a child, about bringing new life into this world she'd fought so hard to reshape, about passing on not just a crown, but a legacy of transformation and strength. I'm terrified, she admitted. So am I, Kael said. But we'll figure it out together, the way we figured out everything else. That night, Lyra dreamed of windows, of standing behind glass, watching life happen without her. But in the dream, she lifted her fist and shattered the glass, stepping through into sunlight and freedom. When she woke, Kael was still sleeping beside her, his arm draped protectively across her waist. She slipped from bed and moved to the window, looking out over the kingdom in the pre-dawn light. Somewhere out there, girls were waking up in households that didn't value them. Children were being told they were nothing, would never amount to anything, should learn their place and stay quiet. And maybe, just maybe, some of them would hear about the queen who'd been poisoned and broken and left for dead, but who'd chosen to survive, who'd turned weakness into power and nothing into everything. Maybe they'd see that and think, if she can do it, so can I. Lyra pressed her palm against the cold glass, remembering the girl she'd been, remembering 6 years of poison and pain and watching life through windows. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was Queen Lyra of Arkenfall, and she'd built a kingdom where the forgotten and underestimated had a chance to prove their worth, where strength was measured by character, not birth, where standing up mattered more than knowing your place. And as the sun rose over her kingdom, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Lyra made a promise to herself, to her unborn child, to every girl out there who felt like nothing. She would keep building, keep fighting, keep proving that the greatest power didn't come from being born strong, but from choosing to stand up every single time they tried to knock you down. From poison to purpose, from sacrifice to queen, from nothing to everything. And she would never ever stop standing, because that was what queens did. That was what survivors did. That was what she did. And no one, not conspirators, not traitors, not the ghosts of her poisoned past, would ever make her into nothing again. She was Lyra Vance, Queen of Arkenfall, and her story was just beginning.